This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been trucking for nearly 20 years now, and I've always prided myself on staying grounded. You know the type. Those guys who swear they've seen UFOs hovering over their rigs or ghosts wandering across the highway at midnight. I always laughed it off, called them lot lizard stories, the kind truckers tell to make their boring drives sound more interesting. I never believed in any of that supernatural crap until last Tuesday. I was hauling a shipment of electronics from Salt Lake City to Sacramento, taking Route 50 through Nevada. If you've never driven it, they call it the loneliest road in America for a reason. Miles and miles of nothing but desert, mountains in the distance, and a black ribbon of asphalt cutting through it all. During the day, it's beautiful in its own desolate way. At night, it's just empty and dark. I'd pulled a double shift because I wanted to make good time. The dispatcher promised a bonus if I could deliver early, and I needed the money. My daughter's college tuition isn't going to pay itself. So there I was, bleary-eyed but pushing through, my thermos of coffee keeping me company while my headlights cut through the darkness ahead. It was around 2:30 in the morning when it started. The cab was quiet except for the low hum of my engine and some classic rock playing softly on the radio. I'd just passed some tiny dot on the map, one of those places with a gas station and maybe 3 houses that somehow gets to call itself a town. My CB radio suddenly crackled to life. This was odd because I hadn't heard another trucker on the channel for at least an hour. The voice came through with some static but clear enough. "Better watch out, he's out there tonight." I grabbed the handset. "Come again? Who's out there?" Nothing but static answered me. I figured it was just some bored trucker messing around or maybe someone warning about highway patrol. I shrugged it off and kept driving, sipping my now lukewarm coffee. The miles ticked by and the strange message faded from my mind. About 30 miles later, my headlights caught something on the side of the road, a figure standing with his thumb out, a hitchhiker out here in the middle of nowhere at almost 3 in the morning. He was wearing what looked like an old-style denim trucker jacket, the kind nobody's worn since the 70s or 80s. His face was hidden under the brim of a hat. I didn't slow down. I've been driving long enough to know better than to pick up random hitchhikers, especially not on deserted highways in the middle of the night. I passed him, watching in my side mirror as my rig whooshed by him, and then he was gone. Not like he jumped away or fell into a ditch. 1 second he was there, illuminated in my taillights, and the next, nothing. Just empty roadside. I blinked hard and checked my mirrors again. The coffee wasn't doing its job. I must be more tired than I thought, hallucinating from exhaustion. I'd heard about that happening to other drivers who pushed themselves too hard. Maybe I needed to pull over and catch a quick nap. But something else was wrong. I knew this stretch of Route 50 pretty well. There should have been a distinctive rock formation coming up on the right, one that looked like a sleeping giant. I couldn't see it, and the mile markers seemed off somehow, like I wasn't making any progress despite maintaining a steady speed. I glanced at my GPS, but the screen was flickering, unable to locate a satellite signal. Great, just what I needed. The CB radio crackled again. This time the voice was different, deeper, with a strange echo to it, like someone talking from the bottom of a well. "You should have picked him up." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I didn't respond. Didn't want to encourage whatever prank was being played. "Nate Tucker," the voice said. "You should have picked him up." My blood turned to ice. I hadn't identified myself on the CB. Hadn't told anyone my name or destination. How did they know who I was? I reached over and turned the volume on the CB all the way down. My hands were shaking now, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter to steady them. This was ridiculous. I was a grown man, not some kid telling ghost stories around a campfire. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe 10 minutes later, I saw him again. Not on the side of the road this time. He was standing directly in the middle of the highway, facing my truck, still with that hat shadowing his face. I cursed and slammed on the brakes. 40 tons of steel and cargo doesn't stop on a dime, and I braced myself for impact, for the sickening thud and bump that would tell me I'd hit someone. The tires squealed against the asphalt as the truck fishtailed slightly, and I fought to keep control. When the rig finally shuddered to a halt, I was breathing hard, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked through the windshield. The road ahead was empty. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Was I losing my mind? I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and climbed down from the cab. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp. I walked around to the front of my truck, dreading what I might find. Nothing. No body, no blood, not even a scrap of clothing. Just the empty highway stretching ahead and behind me. I was about to climb back into my truck when I noticed something strange. A fog was rolling in, thick, white, and completely unnatural for the desert. It seemed to appear from nowhere, curling around my ankles and thickening by the second. Soon, I could barely see 20 feet ahead. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I needed to get back on the road and find the nearest truck stop or town, somewhere with people and lights. I climbed back into the cab and started driving again, but much slower now. The fog was disorienting, making the yellow lines on the road disappear just a few yards ahead of my headlights. I leaned forward in my seat, straining to see. The radio, which had been playing classic rock all night, suddenly switched to static. I reached over to change the station, but every frequency was the same, just white noise with occasional bursts that almost sounded like words. Then I hit something. It wasn't a small bump, like running over debris. It was substantial, like hitting a deer or, God forbid, a person. The truck jolted, and I immediately hit the brakes again. My hands were shaking violently now as I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The fog was so thick I could barely see the ground at my feet. I swept the flashlight beam back and forth, searching for whatever I'd hit. Again, nothing. No animal, no person. But as I stood there, confused and increasingly terrified, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Footsteps coming from behind me. I spun around, pointing my flashlight toward the sound. Through the swirling fog, I could make out a figure approaching. The same figure. The hitchhiker in the denim jacket. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" He didn't answer, just kept walking toward me with a slow, deliberate pace. I backed up until I bumped into the front of my truck. Nowhere left to go. When he was about 6 feet away, he stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he tilted his head up so I could see under the brim of his hat. What should have been a face was just wrong. It was like someone had stretched pale, waxy skin over a skull with no features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, blank skin pulled taut over bone. I fell backward, landing hard on the asphalt. My flashlight clattered away, the beam spinning crazily through the fog before going dark. He loomed over me, this thing that wasn't human, never had been human, and though he had no mouth, I swear I heard his voice in my head. "Time to go, driver." From inside the cab, the CB radio suddenly blared to life at full volume, echoing the same words. "Time to go, driver." The fog closed in around me, so thick I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. I scrambled backward, trying to get away from the figure, but I couldn't tell which direction was which anymore. Everything was white, disorienting. I couldn't find my truck, couldn't find the road. I shouted for help, but my voice seemed swallowed by the fog, not carrying at all. I was so cold now, a bone-deep chill that made my teeth chatter. The last thing I remember clearly is seeing multiple shadows moving through the fog toward me, all of them the same height and build as the hitchhiker, all of them with that same terrible blank face. I don't know how I got away. I don't know how I made it to this truck stop 50 miles from where it all happened. My rig is gone, my phone is gone, my wallet is gone. The clothes I'm wearing now were given to me by another trucker who found me wandering along the highway at dawn, disoriented and babbling. The police think I was drugged and robbed, that I picked up a hitchhiker who slipped something into my coffee while I wasn't looking. They're looking for my truck, but I know they won't find it, not where they're looking. I've been trucking for almost 20 years. I've always prided myself on staying grounded, on not believing in ghost stories. But I know what I saw. And I know that whatever is out there on Route 50, waiting in the fog with its blank face and its outstretched hand, it's still there, waiting for the next driver who passes by in the dead of night. So if you're ever driving that lonely stretch of highway through Nevada and your CB crackles to life with a warning about something being out there, please, for the love of God, listen. Story 2. I've never been able to get this out of my head, even after all these years. I'm almost 30 now, but when I was 16, something happened in my house that I still can't explain. I've tried therapy, talking to friends, even researching paranormal phenomena, but nothing has ever given me answers. I thought maybe writing it down might help, so here goes. I grew up in Maplewood, in a pretty normal 2-story house. My family moved there when I was 14, and everything was fine at first. I'd always been afraid of the dark, like more than normal kids. My parents thought I'd grow out of it, but I never did. I always saw things in the shadows, shapes moving in the darkness when I knew nothing was there. My mom said I had an overactive imagination. Maybe that was true. But what happened when I was 16 wasn't my imagination. It started on a Tuesday night in October. I remember because we'd just had a math test that day, and I was exhausted. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I noticed something odd about the corner of my ceiling, where the walls met. There was a shadow there, darker than the rest of the room. At first, I thought it was just the way the streetlight was coming through my window, creating weird shadows. But when I turned on my lamp to check, the shadow was still there. I tried to ignore it and go to sleep, but I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. It wasn't just fear. It was this gut-deep certainty that something was there, something that shouldn't be. I ended up falling asleep with my light on that night. The next morning, I felt silly about the whole thing. The shadow was gone, and in the daylight, my room looked completely normal. I convinced myself I was just tired and seeing things. But the next night, the shadow was back, and it seemed bigger somehow, darker, like it had spread a few inches across my ceiling. Again, I slept with the light on, telling myself I was being ridiculous. By the third night, I couldn't pretend anymore. The shadow now covered almost a quarter of my ceiling, and it seemed to have a depth to it that normal shadows don't have. Like if you stared at it long enough, you could fall into it. And the feeling that came with it, I don't know how to describe it except to say it felt evil. Not just scary, but malevolent, like it wanted to hurt me. I didn't tell my parents right away. My dad worked long hours, and my mom was always stressed taking care of my 2 younger brothers. Plus, I was 16. I was supposed to be growing out of childish fears, not developing new ones, so I kept quiet and tried to deal with it myself. I started spending less time in my room. I'd do homework at the kitchen table instead of my desk. I'd hang out in the living room until I was exhausted, then rush into my room, turn on all the lights, and try to fall asleep before I could think too much about the shadow that was now spreading across half my ceiling. By the 5th night, I couldn't take it anymore. The shadow had grown so much that it covered most of my ceiling and was starting to creep down the walls. The feeling of malice was so strong that I couldn't stay in my room for more than a few minutes without feeling like I was going to throw up or pass out. My heart would race, my hands would shake, and I'd get this overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen. I grabbed my pillow and blanket and went to my parents' room. I must have looked pretty freaked out because they didn't even ask questions when I said I was scared and wanted to sleep on their floor. I think they assumed I'd had a nightmare or watched a scary movie. The next day was Saturday, and my parents had planned a date night. They asked if I would babysit my brothers, who were 10 and 8 at the time. I agreed, not wanting to seem weak or crazy, but I was terrified of being in the house without my parents. All day, I felt on edge. The shadow was confined to my room, but I swear I could feel its presence throughout the house, like a low hum of malice just at the edge of my awareness. I avoided going upstairs at all, and I kept all the lights on downstairs. After my parents left around 6, I tried to act normal for my brothers. We had pizza, played video games, and then I set them up with a movie in the living room. I sat on the couch with my back to the kitchen, which was connected to the living room by a wide doorway. The TV was on the wall to my right, and if you looked at the screen at the right angle, you could see the reflection of the kitchen behind me. About halfway through the movie, I started to feel it. That same oppressive feeling of dread that I'd been experiencing in my room, but now it was here, downstairs. The air felt heavier, colder. The hairs on my arms stood up and my chest tightened, like I couldn't get enough air. And then I had this thought, no, not a thought, more like a certainty, that if I looked at the TV screen, I would see someone standing behind me in the reflection. Not just someone, something that had been watching me from that shadow in my room, something that had been growing stronger, feeding off my fear. I tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous, but the feeling got more intense. I could almost feel breath on the back of my neck. The presence behind me felt so real, so close, and so incredibly malicious that I thought I might die from fear alone. It wasn't just watching me. It hated me. It wanted to hurt me, to destroy me, to consume me. I couldn't move. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't even look at the TV screen. I just sat there, frozen, while my brothers watched the movie, completely oblivious to what was happening. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I managed to reach for my phone. With shaking hands, I called my parents. When my mom answered, I completely broke down. I was hyperventilating, crying so hard she could barely understand me. All I could say was, "Please come home. Please come home now." To their credit, my parents didn't question it. They said they were on their way and told me to stay with my brothers. I hung up and immediately gathered my brothers, telling them we needed to wait outside for Mom and Dad. I made up some excuse about wanting to surprise them, but the truth was I couldn't stay in that house another minute. We sat on the front steps, me constantly looking over my shoulder at the house, half expecting to see that shadow spreading across the windows. My brothers thought it was a game at first, but they got bored quickly and started complaining about missing their movie. When my parents' car finally pulled into the driveway, I nearly collapsed with relief. My dad took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. My mom took my brothers inside, and I stayed outside with my dad, finally telling him everything through tears and panic. I expected him to tell me I was imagining things or having anxiety. Instead, he got very quiet and very serious. He asked me detailed questions about the shadow, about the feelings I'd been having. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. "I forgot to bless the house when we moved in," he said. For context, we were Mormon. In our faith, it's common for the father to give a blessing to a new home, basically asking for protection and good spirits to dwell there. My dad had been so busy with work when we moved that he'd forgotten to do it. He told me to wait outside with my mom and brothers, and he went into the house alone. I don't know exactly what he did, but he was in there for about 20 minutes. When he came out, he looked tired but relieved. He said he'd gone into my room and said a prayer, casting out any evil spirits and blessing the house. I was skeptical, to say the least. It seemed too simple a solution for something that had felt so powerfully wrong. But when we went back inside, the house felt different, lighter somehow. The oppressive feeling was gone. That night, I still slept in my parents' room, but the next day, I forced myself to go into my bedroom. The shadow was gone, not just smaller or lighter, completely gone. My room looked normal, felt normal. Over the next few days, the fear gradually faded. I started sleeping in my room again, though I kept a nightlight for months afterward. Whatever had been there was gone. I've thought about this experience constantly over the years. I've questioned it, rationalized it, doubted my own memories. I'm not even Mormon anymore. I consider myself spiritual but not religious. But nothing has ever shaken my certainty that what I experienced was real. I don't know if it was a demon, a ghost, or something else entirely. I don't know why it chose my room or me. I don't know if my dad's prayer actually banished it or if it just decided to leave. But I know what I felt, and it was pure evil. Not just the absence of good, but something actively, aggressively malicious. To this day, I can't sleep in complete darkness. I can't sit with my back to open doorways. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still get that feeling of being watched. It never lasts long, and I've never seen that shadow again. But those brief moments of fear are enough to remind me that there are things in this world, or perhaps outside of it, that we don't understand and can't explain. That's my story. I still don't have answers, and I'm not sure I ever will. But whatever was in my house that week, whatever was growing in that shadow, it was real. And sometimes I worry that it's still out there somewhere, waiting. Story 3. I've never been the type to believe in the paranormal, ghost stories, hauntings, demons. It was all just entertainment to me until 3 months ago. I still don't know what to make of what's been happening in my house, but I need to get this out there. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. I've lived in my house on Elm Street for about 4 years now. It's nothing special. Just a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood where most people keep to themselves. I bought it after my divorce as a fresh start. Never had any issues until recently. It started with small things I could easily dismiss. Objects not being where I left them. The feeling of being watched when I was alone. Cold spots in rooms that had been warm moments before. I blamed it on forgetfulness, an overactive imagination, and faulty heating. Normal explanations for normal occurrences, right? The first actual sighting happened on a Tuesday evening in October. I remember because I'd just gotten home from a particularly stressful day at work. I was heating up leftover pasta in the microwave when I caught movement in my peripheral vision near the hallway leading to the bedrooms. When I turned, I saw something. It wasn't fully formed, more like a dark smudge against the wall. Roughly person-shaped but without clear features. It was there for maybe 2 seconds before it disappeared. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, my eyes playing tricks after staring at a computer screen all day. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. The next night, I saw it again. This time I was in the living room watching TV when that same dark shape appeared in the doorway to the kitchen. It was more defined this time, definitely human-shaped, but completely black, like a hole cut into reality. It was about my height, maybe 5'10", but unnaturally thin, skeletal almost. And its arms, God, its arms ended in stumps, no hands, just nothing. Like whoever designed this thing forgot to finish drawing it. I froze completely. The remote control slipped from my grip and clattered on the hardwood floor. The thing didn't move, it just stood there, facing me. I couldn't see eyes, but I knew it was watching me. The weight of its gaze was unmistakable. After what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, I managed to find my voice. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly weak. Nothing, no response, and then it was gone. Not like it walked away or faded. It was just there one moment and gone the next, like someone had flipped a switch. I didn't sleep well that night, or the next. I kept the lights on and checked every corner of my house repeatedly. I even considered calling someone, a friend, my sister, maybe even the police. But what would I say? Help, there's a shadow person with no hands in my house. They'd think I was having a mental breakdown. For about a week, I kept seeing the thin shadow figure, always in my peripheral vision, always standing perfectly still, never approaching me. Never making a sound, just watching. I started calling it Stumpy in my head, not out of affection but as a way to make it seem less terrifying. Giving it a silly name made it feel less real somehow. Then the second one appeared. I was doing laundry in the basement. It was around 8 in the evening, and I'd just loaded the washing machine when the temperature seemed to plummet. My breath came out in visible puffs and the hairs on my arms stood up. That's when I felt it. A presence behind me, massive and overwhelming. When I turned around, I saw it standing at the bottom of the basement stairs. Unlike Stumpy, this thing was huge. It must have been at least 7 feet tall, its head nearly touching the low ceiling of the basement. It was completely black, like the other one, but its shape was different. It wore what looked like a hat, not like a baseball cap, but more like an old-fashioned fedora or something similar, and its body, Jesus. Its body looked like it was wrapped in some kind of tight material, like those gimp suits from horror movies, but made entirely of darkness. The air around it seemed thick, heavy with something I can only describe as hatred. The malevolence coming off this thing was palpable. I could almost taste it, metallic and bitter at the back of my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. It felt like an eternity that we stood there, this towering shadow figure and me, frozen in my basement among half-folded laundry. Then the washing machine clicked into its cycle with a loud thunk, and I jumped. When I looked back at the stairs, the figure was gone. I ran upstairs so fast I tripped twice, slamming the basement door behind me and locking it, as if that would keep something like that contained. I slept on the couch that night with all the lights on and a kitchen knife on the coffee table beside me. After that night, both shadow figures began appearing with increasing frequency. Stumpy would show up in hallways, doorways, sometimes even standing in corners of whatever room I was in. The tall one, I started calling it Hat Man in my desperate attempt to normalize the abnormal, was less frequent but far more terrifying. It preferred darker areas of the house. The basement, the walk-in closet in my bedroom, the space between my shower curtain and the wall in the bathroom. I tried to document what was happening. I set up my phone to record rooms where they frequently appeared, but they never showed up on camera. I tried talking to them, asking what they wanted. No response. I even, in a moment of desperation, tried commanding them to leave. They remained, impassive and silent. One particularly bad night about 3 weeks ago, I woke up around 3 in the morning with that now familiar feeling of being watched. When I opened my eyes, both of them were in my bedroom. Stumpy stood at the foot of my bed while Hatman loomed in the corner by my dresser. The air was so cold I could see my breath, and the feeling of dread was so intense I thought I might throw up. I couldn't move. Not from sleep paralysis. I've had that before, and this was different. This was pure, primal fear keeping me pinned to my mattress. They didn't approach, didn't make any threatening moves. They just watched for nearly an hour until the first hints of dawn began to lighten my window blinds, and they faded away as the darkness did. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent hours researching shadow people online. Most accounts described seeing just one entity, usually briefly, often during sleep paralysis or in states between waking and sleeping. Very few mentioned multiple entities, and none described anything quite like what I was experiencing. I've tried sage smudging. I've tried religious prayers from various faiths. I've tried telling them firmly to leave. Nothing works. Last Friday was the worst encounter yet. I'd just gotten home from grocery shopping around 7 in the evening. It was already dark outside, and as I was putting away groceries in the kitchen, the lights flickered. Not just once, but repeatedly, like someone was playing with the switch. Then they went out completely. In the sudden darkness, I heard something I'd never heard before from either entity. Movement. A soft shuffling sound coming from the living room, then another from the hallway. They were moving around in the dark. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, my hands shaking so badly I dropped it twice before managing to turn on the light. When I did, I saw both Stumpy and Hatman standing in the kitchen doorway, side by side for the first time. The air felt electrified, thick with that same malevolence I'd felt from Hatman, but now doubled in intensity. I backed up against the counter, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. They didn't respond, of course, but something changed. Hatman tilted its head slightly, an unnervingly human gesture from something so clearly not human. And Stumpy. Stumpy raised one of its arm stumps, pointing it directly at me. I don't know how long we stood there in that silent standoff. Eventually, the lights flickered back on, and they were gone. But something had changed. They'd shown intention for the first time. They weren't just passive observers anymore. That night, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel. I stayed there for 3 days, hoping that whatever was in my house would lose interest or move on if I wasn't there. When I returned on Monday, the house seemed normal, quiet, empty. For about 6 hours, I was making dinner, when I felt a now familiar chill pass through the kitchen. I didn't need to turn around to know Stumpy was back, standing in its usual spot in the doorway. And I knew without having to check that somewhere in the house, probably in a dark corner of the basement or inside a closet, Hatman was waiting too. They're still here. They've been here every day for the past week. Sometimes they stay for hours, sometimes just for a few seconds. They never try to touch me or harm me physically, but the psychological toll is becoming unbearable. I jump at every shadow. I haven't had a full night's sleep in weeks. I keep all the lights on constantly, but it doesn't deter them. I'm writing this now at my kitchen table. It's nearly midnight. Stumpy is standing in the corner by the refrigerator. It's been there for about 40 minutes. I can feel Hatman somewhere in the house too, probably in the basement. The heaviness in the air tells me it's close. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't keep living like this, but I can't afford to move out either. I've considered bringing in a medium or paranormal investigator, but I'm terrified of what might happen if I acknowledge these entities to someone else. Would it make them angry, more powerful? The worst part is not knowing what they want. Are they just observing me? Are they building up to something worse? Are they feeding off my fear? I've tried ignoring them, acknowledging them, talking to them, yelling at them. Nothing changes their behavior. Wait, the lights just flickered. Stumpy is gone from the corner, but I can hear that shuffling sound again coming from down the hall, and the air, it feels heavy, like right before a thunderstorm. Something's different tonight, I think. Unfold my tree. Story 4. I've never been the type to believe in the supernatural, ghost stories, paranormal experiences, all that stuff. I always chalked it up to overactive imaginations or people looking for attention. But what's been happening to me these past few days has completely shattered my perception of reality. I'm still trying to make sense of it, and honestly, I'm terrified to go to sleep tonight. It started 3 nights ago. I went to bed as usual with my wife Sarah, nothing out of the ordinary. We'd had a quiet evening watching some mindless reality TV show, then headed to bed around 11. I remember feeling particularly tired that night. I'd had a long day at work dealing with a difficult client who seemed determined to make my life miserable. I fell asleep almost immediately, which is unusual for me. I typically toss and turn for at least 30 minutes before drifting off. But that night was different. I slipped into sleep like sinking into dark water. The dream started normally enough. Sarah and I were in our bed, covered by our usual white cotton sheet. It was our bedroom, but something felt off. The proportions weren't quite right. The ceiling seemed higher, the walls further away. But you know how dreams are. Those details don't really register as wrong in the moment. I woke up, within the dream, that strange sensation where you think you're awake, but you're still dreaming. The room was bathed in a bluish light that didn't come from anywhere specific. I noticed Sarah wasn't beside me anymore. Instead, she was sitting up, her head tilted back at an uncomfortable angle, staring at the ceiling. No, not the ceiling. She was looking at the roof, as if she could see through the ceiling to whatever was above. And she was talking, whispering really, in a voice that wasn't quite hers. It was higher pitched, almost childlike, but with a strange cadence that made my skin crawl. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sounded reverent, like she was speaking to something she both feared and worshipped. That's when the déjà vu hit me, a crushing certainty that we'd been in this exact situation before, many times. I knew something terrible was about to happen if I didn't intervene. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm, harder than I meant to. "How many times have I told you not to take your face out of the bedsheet?" I hissed at her. The words came out of my mouth automatically, like I was reading from a script I'd memorized long ago. Her head snapped down to look at me, and for a split second her face, God, her face wasn't right. It was still Sarah, but her features were subtly wrong. Eyes too wide, mouth stretched in an unnatural smile. Then I blinked, and she looked normal again, confused by my outburst. I yanked her down beside me and pulled the sheet over both our heads. "Don't look up again," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's not safe." In the dream, we lay there under the sheet, breathing the same hot air, my arms wrapped protectively around her. I could feel her trembling. Or maybe it was me who was trembling. And all the while, I had this overwhelming sense that something was moving on the roof above us, something heavy that shouldn't be there, something watching, waiting for us to look up again. That's when I actually woke up. I mean really woke up, back in reality. It was 3:17 in the morning according to our bedside clock, the red numbers glowing in the darkness. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might be having a heart attack. I was drenched in sweat, the sheets sticking to my skin. The worst part was the absolute certainty that if I opened my eyes fully, I would see something standing in our bedroom, something that had followed me back from the dream. The fear was so intense, so primal, that I couldn't move. I just lay there, eyes squeezed shut, barely breathing, until morning came. When my alarm finally went off at 7, Sarah stirred beside me, completely normal, completely unaware of my night terror. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about it. It sounded too crazy, too childish. I had a nightmare where you were talking to monsters on our roof. Yeah, that would go over well. I spent the day distracted, jumpy. Co-workers commented that I looked tired, asked if I was feeling all right. I blamed it on insomnia, which wasn't entirely a lie. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted, but the thought of going to sleep again filled me with dread. I tried to stay up as late as possible, scrolling mindlessly through social media, watching YouTube videos I wasn't really paying attention to. But eventually, around 1 in the morning, exhaustion won out. Sarah had gone to bed hours earlier, and I finally dragged myself to join her. I remember praying not to dream as I drifted off, but of course, I did dream, and this second dream was even more disturbing than the first. It started with me visiting my friend Melissa's house. Melissa and I have been friends since college, and I'm close with her husband Jack too. In the dream, we were having coffee in her kitchen, chatting about nothing important. Everything seemed normal, except for a strange heaviness in the air, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. After what seemed like hours of mundane conversation, I said goodbye and left. But instead of waking up or the dream shifting to something else, the perspective changed. Suddenly, I wasn't myself anymore. I was Jack, Melissa's husband. I was in their kitchen, making tea. It was evening in the dream, the kitchen lit by the warm yellow glow of the overhead light. I could feel the weight of Jack's body, the slight ache in his lower back from a day of yard work, the roughness of his calloused hands as he reached for the kettle. It was disorienting, being in someone else's body, experiencing their sensations. As Jack, I was thinking about what to make for dinner, mentally cataloging the contents of the refrigerator. Normal, everyday thoughts. Then I heard Melissa's voice from the living room, except it wasn't really her voice. It had the same unsettling quality as Sarah's voice in my previous dream, higher pitched with that strange, unnatural cadence. I couldn't make out the words, just the sound of her voice rising and falling in a rhythm that made no sense. Jack set down the kettle and walked toward the living room, a sense of unease growing with each step. The living room door was closed, which was unusual. They never closed doors inside their house. I could feel Jack's confusion and mounting concern. "Mel," he called out, rapping his knuckles lightly on the door. "Who are you talking to?" The voice stopped abruptly. There was a long silence, so complete it seemed to have weight and substance. Then Melissa spoke again, but this time in her normal voice. "No one, honey. Just talking to myself." But Jack, or rather, I as Jack, knew that was a lie. There was something profoundly wrong with the situation. I could feel Jack's hand on the doorknob, his hesitation, the internal debate about whether to open it. Just as he decided to turn the knob, I woke up, gasping for breath like I'd been underwater. It was 4:23 in the morning. Once again, I was drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and once again, I had that terrible certainty that something was in the room with me, something that had followed me out of the dream. I lay there, rigid with fear, eyes shut tight, waiting for morning. Every small noise, the house settling, the hum of the refrigerator, Sarah's soft breathing, seemed magnified, threatening. I was convinced that if I opened my eyes, I would see something standing at the foot of our bed, or worse, leaning over me, just inches from my face. When morning finally came, I was a wreck. Sarah noticed this time, asked me what was wrong. I mumbled something about not sleeping well, about stress at work. I couldn't tell her the truth. How do you tell someone that you're having dreams where supernatural entities are trying to communicate with them? She'd think I was losing my mind. Hell, maybe I am. What disturbs me the most about these dreams isn't just their vividness or the lingering fear they leave behind. It's the pattern. In both dreams, I'm not the one being directly threatened or contacted by whatever these entities are. I'm witnessing others, people I love, being influenced or manipulated by something unseen. And in both dreams, I had that strong sense of déjà vu, like this has all happened before, many times. Like we're caught in some kind of cycle that I'm only now becoming aware of. It's now been 3 days since the first dream. I haven't slept more than a few hours total. I'm running on caffeine and fear. Every time I start to drift off, I jerk awake, terrified of what might be waiting for me in my dreams. I've started researching dream phenomena, supernatural experiences, anything that might explain what's happening to me. Most of it seems like nonsense, but some accounts share similarities with what I'm experiencing. People who believe their dreams are more than just dreams, that they're glimpses into another reality or warnings about something trying to break through into our world. I called Melissa today just to check in. I tried to keep the conversation casual, but I was listening for any sign that something might be wrong, that my dream might have been more than just a dream. She seemed completely normal, laughing about how Jack had accidentally shrunk her favorite sweater in the dryer. I didn't have the courage to ask if anything strange had happened at their house recently. Tonight I'm going to try to stay awake again. I've set up a makeshift bed on the couch, TV on low for company. Sarah wasn't happy about it, but I told her my insomnia was keeping her awake too. Better for one of us to get a good night's sleep, I said. But I know I can't stay awake forever. Eventually I'll have to sleep, and I'm terrified of what might be waiting for me when I do. What if the dreams are getting more intense for a reason? What if something is trying to use me or use my connection to the people I love to cross over into our world? Or what if I'm just losing my mind? I don't know which possibility scares me more. Story 5. I haven't talked about this in years. Not to my wife, my kids, not even to the other drivers at the truck stops. When you experience something that defies explanation, sometimes the best thing is to lock it away in that part of your brain where nightmares go to die. But it's been eating at me, and I need to get this off my chest. I've been driving big rigs for 22 years. You name it, I've hauled it. Furniture, electronics, frozen goods, you get the picture. I've driven through blizzards in Montana, flash floods in Arizona, and traffic in LA that would make a saint curse. Nothing prepared me for what happened on Dead Man's Pass. This was back in February of 2019. I was doing a routine overnight haul from Seattle to Boise. Just another job. I'd done this route dozens of times before. The load was electronics, nothing special, nothing heavy. My dispatch had me leaving around 8 in the evening, which meant I'd be hitting the Blue Mountains in Oregon around midnight. For those who don't know, Dead Man's Pass is this stretch of Interstate 84 that cuts through the Blue Mountains. It's notorious among truckers. Steep grades, sharp curves, and in winter, ice that forms faster than you can say jackknife. They don't call it Dead Man's Pass for nothing. But that night, the weather report was clear. Cold but dry, full moon, good visibility. Should have been an easy drive. I remember stopping at a truck stop just outside of Pendleton for coffee. Strong, black, 2 sugars. I always drink it the same way. The place was nearly empty. Just me, the cashier half asleep behind the counter, and this old-timer sitting in a booth nursing a cup that looked like it had gone cold hours ago. As I was paying the cashier, this kid, maybe 20 years old with acne scars, looked at me funny. "Heading east?" he asked. I nodded. "Over the pass?" Another nod. He hesitated like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. "Be careful up there tonight," was all he said. I didn't think much of it at the time. Locals are always warning truckers about the pass. I thanked him, grabbed my coffee, and headed back to my rig. It was around 11:30 when I started the climb up to the pass. The moon was so bright it cast shadows across the road. Normally, there'd be at least a few other trucks making the same journey, but that night, the highway was empty. Just me and 18 wheels of Peterbilt rolling through the darkness. The first sign something was off was the silence. If you've ever driven a semi, you know they're never quiet. There's always the rumble of the engine, the hiss of air brakes, the creak of the trailer. But suddenly, all I could hear was my own breathing. It was like someone had thrown a blanket over the world. Then my CB radio crackled to life. Now truckers use Channel 19 for highway talk, warnings about speed traps, accidents ahead, that sort of thing. But this came through on Channel 9, the emergency channel. Just static at first, then a voice, so quiet I had to strain to hear it. Driver, danger ahead. I picked up the handset. This is eastbound on I-84. You breaking up. Say again. More static then. Turn back. Not safe. Tonight. I tried to respond, but whoever it was didn't come back. I figured it was just interference, maybe someone miles away whose signal was bouncing off the mountains. About 20 minutes later, I reached the summit of the pass. The air felt different up there, heavier somehow, like right before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear as glass. That full moon hung over the mountains like a spotlight. I needed to take a leak and stretch my legs, so I pulled into this small rest area at the top. There were no other vehicles there, just a couple of picnic tables and those concrete restrooms that always smell like bleach and things you don't want to think about. When I got back to my truck, I noticed something odd. There was this mist forming, but only in patches, like clouds had fallen to the ground. It wasn't weather I recognized, and I've seen just about everything in my years on the road. I started down the eastern side of the pass. The descent is always trickier than the climb. You're riding your brakes, watching your speed, keeping an eye out for deer or elk that might dart into the road. I was doing about 40, taking it easy on the curves. That's when I saw it in my side mirror. Headlights coming up fast behind me. Now, I'm used to four-wheelers racing past trucks on downgrades, college kids mostly, who think their Honda Civics are invincible. But these weren't car headlights. They were mounted high, like on a semi, and they were closing the gap between us way too quickly for safety. I edged over as far as I could to the right to give them room to pass, muttering curses under my breath about idiot drivers who don't respect the physics of a fully loaded truck on a downgrade. The truck blew past me like I was standing still. It was an old Kenworth, the kind they don't make anymore, with a long nose and a rusted body that looked like it had seen every state in the Union twice. But what caught my attention was the color, a deep red that almost looked black in the moonlight. As it passed, I caught a glimpse of the driver's side window, empty. There was no one behind the wheel. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. Had to be the angle or a reflection from the moonlight. No way a truck was driving itself. But as the Kenworth pulled ahead, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was someone, or something, in the passenger seat. Just a silhouette against the cab's interior light. But it turned to look at me as the truck passed. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark shape where a face should be. And I swear on my mother's grave, it raised what looked like a hand and pointed directly at me. The Kenworth sped up, rounding a curve ahead and disappearing from view. I was shaken but told myself I was just tired, seeing things. I'd been on the road too long, that's all. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. A few miles down the road, I came to a small gas station that catered to truckers. I wasn't low on fuel, but I needed to stop, to collect myself. As I pulled in, my headlights swept across the parking lot, and there it was. The same rusted red Kenworth parked at the far end of the lot, no lights on. I almost drove right back onto the highway, but convinced myself I was being ridiculous. It was just another truck. Had to be. So I parked as far away from it as possible and went inside. The gas station attendant was an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked up from her magazine when I walked in. "You all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. Just tired. Long haul from Seattle. She nodded knowingly. Coffee's fresh if you want some. I poured myself a cup, my hands still shaking slightly. Through the window I could see both trucks, my blue Peterbilt and that rusted Kenworth, sitting there like a predator waiting for its prey. "That red truck," I said, trying to sound casual. "It been here long?" The woman looked confused. "What red truck?" I pointed, but when I turned back to look, the Kenworth was gone, just an empty space where it had been moments before. I left my coffee on the counter, mumbled something about forgetting my wallet and hurried back to my truck. As I climbed into the cab, I heard the CB radio crackle again. "Driver, I see you." I switched channels, but the voice followed. "This road, my road, for 70 years. I killed the radio and started the engine. The sooner I got down this mountain and back to civilization, the better. About 5 miles from the gas station, my truck started to act up. The dashboard lights flickered and the engine sputtered like it wasn't getting enough fuel. I managed to pull onto the shoulder just as everything died. Lights, engine, everything. I sat there in the sudden silence, my breath fogging the window. The moonlight cast long shadows across the road, and the forest beyond seemed to press in on all sides. I tried the ignition, but nothing happened. Not even a click. That's when I felt it, a vibration running through the cab. At first I thought it was another truck passing by, but when I looked in my mirrors, the road behind me was empty. Then, slowly, those familiar high beams appeared, coming around the bend. The red Kenworth pulled up behind my truck and stopped, its engine idling. I couldn't see inside the cab from where I sat, but I knew, somehow I just knew, that whatever was in there was watching me. My CB radio suddenly came to life again, even though the power was dead. "You're mine now, driver. This road doesn't end for you." The voice was clearer now, a rasping whisper that seemed to come from inside my own head, as much as from the radio. I've never been so terrified in my life. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grab the flashlight from my glove compartment. I didn't think, just reacted. I flung open the door and jumped down from the cab. The night air hit me like a slap, cold enough to burn my lungs. I started walking, running, down the shoulder, away from both trucks. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the sound of air brakes releasing behind me. I must have run nearly 2 miles before I saw lights ahead, a small diner just off the highway that catered to the overnight crowd. I burst through the door, sweating despite the cold, my breath coming in gasps. There were a few people inside, a couple of truckers at the counter, a waitress wiping down tables. They all turned to look at me, and I must have been a sight. My truck, I managed to say between breaths, broke down, up the road. One of the truckers, a big guy with a beard that reached his chest, offered to call a tow service. I collapsed into a booth, ordered coffee I couldn't drink, and waited for dawn. I refused to go back to my truck until daylight. When we finally did, the tow truck driver leading the way, my Peterbilt started up without a problem. The mechanic who checked it later said there was nothing wrong with it. Not the battery, not the fuel line, nothing. I finished that delivery to Boise, but it was my last run through Dead Man's Pass. I changed routes, even though it meant less money and longer hauls. Some places you don't go back to. Some roads you leave behind for good. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. Sometimes, when I'm driving late and the CB is quiet, I'll hear static break through. And in that static, a voice, that same rasping whisper, calling my name, telling me it's waiting, telling me the road is still there and so is it. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what that thing was or why it chose me. All I know is that I escaped something that wasn't natural, wasn't right, and I have a feeling it's still up there on Dead Man's Pass, waiting for drivers who are alone on the road at midnight under a full moon. Story 6. I still have nightmares about that place. It's been 6 months since we went to the abandoned Pinewood Hotel, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking I'm back there. I've never shared this with anyone outside of Zeke and Mari because I'm afraid people will think I'm crazy. Hell, sometimes I think I am. It started as just another urban exploration trip. We're not professionals or anything. just three friends who like to check out abandoned places on weekends. Marie's the photographer, always looking for that perfect eerie shot for her Instagram. Zeke's the history buff who researches these places beforehand. And me, I'm just along for the ride usually. We found the hotel while driving back from another exploration spot that turned out to be demolished. It was Zeke who spotted it first, just barely visible through overgrown trees off Highway 16, about 20 minutes outside Pinewood. The sign was faded, but you could still make out Pinewood Hotel in that typical 90s font. "Guys, I don't remember reading about this place online," Zeke said, which should have been our first warning. Zeke knows every abandoned building within a 100-mile radius. We pulled off onto the gravel driveway that was almost completely reclaimed by weeds. It was around 4 in the afternoon, early October, so we still had a few hours of daylight. The hotel was bigger than I expected. 4 stories of faded yellow brick with most windows intact but clouded with grime. There was something off about the proportions, but I couldn't put my finger on it. "This is perfect," Mari said, already snapping pictures of the exterior. "Look at those vines growing up the side. Nature reclaiming man's creation." The front entrance had glass doors, one broken and hanging off its hinges. We slipped through easily. No need to break in when nature's already done it for you. Inside, the lobby still had a reception desk with an ancient computer terminal. Papers were scattered everywhere, and there was a weird smell, like old perfume mixed with mold. Not the usual abandoned building smell. "When do you think this place closed down?" I asked. Zeke was examining a newspaper on the floor. "Based on this, sometime in 98 or 99. There's a calendar on the wall over there that says October 1998. We decided to split up to cover more ground. Another stupid mistake. We had our phones and agreed to text updates every 15 minutes. I took the first floor, Zeke went up to the second, and Mari headed to the third. The hallways were weird. That's the only way I can describe them. They seemed to curve slightly when they should have been straight, and the hotel felt bigger inside than it looked from outside. I chalked it up to poor architectural choices from the 90s. I explored what looked like administrative offices. Nothing too interesting, just paper-filled filing cabinets and dusty desks. I took a few pictures to show the others later. One office had a wall full of Employee of the Month photos, all showing the same middle-aged man with a plastered-on smile. The plaque underneath read Harold Jennings for every single month from 1996 to 1997-1998. Weird, but not scary yet. After about 45 minutes, my phone buzzed with a message from Zeke. "Found the ballroom. You guys need to see this." I headed toward the staircase, passing the elevators, which were obviously not working. The button panel was smashed in, with wires hanging out. I met Mari coming down from the 3rd floor. "Find anything cool?" I asked. She shrugged. "Just a hallway of suites. Beds are still made up like they were expecting guests. Weirdest thing, though, there were modern water bottles on some nightstands, like the kind you'd buy today." We found Zeke in what must have been the hotel ballroom. The ceiling was high with broken chandeliers. Shattered mirrors lined one wall, and chairs were upturned everywhere as if there had been a fight. "Look at this," Zeke said, pointing to the center of the room where a single wheelchair sat facing a wall. Just facing the wall. Nothing on the wall, nothing special about it. "Maybe the cleaning staff left it," Mari suggested, but her voice was uncertain. "In the middle of the ballroom, facing a wall?" Zeke shook his head. "And look at these mirror fragments." He pointed to the floor where pieces of mirror were arranged in a pattern that almost looked like letters. "Probably just fell that way," I said, not believing it myself. We spent the next hour exploring the 2nd floor together. The layout made no sense. Rooms that should have connected didn't. Hallways that should have been straight took odd turns. By 6:30, the sun was setting and the hotel was getting dark fast. "We should head out," I said, checking my phone. "Battery's at 40%. We all agreed and headed toward what we thought was the staircase back to the lobby. That's when things got really wrong. The staircase led us to the third floor instead of the first. We tried another staircase and it took us to the fourth floor. Every attempt to go down seemed to take us up or to the same floor. "This doesn't make any sense," Mari said, trying to pull up the map feature on her phone. No signal. We tried to retrace our steps, but nothing looked familiar anymore. Doors that should have led to hallways opened into closets filled with shoes, dozens of pairs, all pointed toward the walls. One room was filled with TV sets stacked to the ceiling, all off except one in the middle that showed static. By 7:30, we were officially lost. The hotel was completely dark now, except for our phone flashlights. The windows we passed showed only blackness outside, not even moonlight. "Let's just find a way out," Zeke said, trying to sound calm, but I could hear the edge in his voice. "There has to be a fire exit or something." We found an emergency exit, but the door was welded shut, not locked, welded with melted metal visible around the edges. I was checking out an elevator shaft through a crack in the doors when I saw it. A face in the cracked mirror on the opposite wall. It wasn't one of us. It was pale, unnaturally tall, with a stretched grin that made my blood freeze. When I spun around, there was nothing there, just the empty hallway. I didn't tell the others. I thought I was seeing things from stress in the dark. Around 8:30, Mari screamed. We ran to her and found her staring into a utility closet. It was packed with porcelain dolls, dozens of them, all with their eyes gouged out. Some of them seemed to twitch as we passed the light over them. "I swear one of them moved," Mari whispered. "I swear to God." "It's just the shadows from our lights," Zeke said, but he closed the door quickly. By 9:30, we gave up trying to find an exit in the dark. We found what looked like the old hotel kitchen and decided to wait until morning. The kitchen was large with industrial equipment covered in dust. An old brick fireplace stood at one end, which seemed odd for a commercial kitchen. We sat on the floor, backs against the center island, sharing the last of our water and a granola bar Mari had in her bag. Our phones were all below 20% now, so we turned off two and kept just mine on as a light. That's when I heard it, a rustling sound from the fireplace. I turned my light toward it but saw nothing. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked. They nodded, eyes wide. I stood up to check, shining the light into the blackened opening. Nothing. I turned back to tell them it was probably just a rat. Crash! A brick flew out of the fireplace and smashed against the far wall, missing my head by inches. We all screamed and scrambled back. "What the fuck?" Zeke yelled. "Let's get out of here." Mari grabbed her bag. "We've been trying for hours," I reminded her. We heard a phone ringing somewhere in the distance, an old telephone ring, distorted and slow, like a record played at the wrong speed. We huddled together in that kitchen all night. None of us slept. We heard footsteps above us, around us, whispers in the walls. Once, all the cabinet doors opened at once, then slammed shut. When morning finally came, light filtered through a grimy window. And suddenly, as if it had been there all along, we saw a plastic curtain hanging over a doorway we hadn't noticed before. Behind it was a straight shot to a side exit, not 15 feet from where we'd been sitting all night. We ran out into the morning light, gasping fresh air. The hotel looked different in daylight, smaller, more decrepit, almost sad. As we hurried to the car, I looked back at one of the windows and swear I saw flickering candlelight in what might have been the living room. But hotels don't have living rooms, do they? We've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe there was a homeless person living there who was messing with us. Maybe we got disoriented in the dark. But none of that explains the impossible layout, the brick that flew by itself, or the fact that we couldn't find an exit that was right there the whole time. I drove by the spot last week. The hotel was gone. Not demolished, gone. Just trees and undergrowth where it should have been. I asked a gas station attendant in Pinewood about it. He looked at me funny and said there hadn't been a hotel on that stretch of highway since the 70s, when it burned down with everyone inside. I don't go exploring anymore, neither do Zeke or Mari. Some places aren't abandoned, they're waiting. Story 7. I've worked at McDonald's for a little over 3 years now. been a manager for the last year and a half. I'm pretty used to the overnight shift. It's usually just me and a couple other employees. We get the place cleaned up, prep for breakfast, and it's generally no big deal. But what happened last week, I'm still trying to make sense of it. It started when both of the employees scheduled for that night called out. One had a sick kid, the other's car broke down. Whatever, it happens. I figured it wasn't a huge deal since we were closed for the night anyway. I just needed to do dishes and breakfast prep. No customers to worry about at least. Here's the thing though, I've always felt something in that building when it gets quiet. I've never been big into ghost stories or whatever. I'm pretty agnostic about all that supernatural stuff. I usually just ignore the weird vibes and focus on my job. But that night, being completely alone in there, that was different. I should mention that I'm not the only one who's felt it. About a month ago, we hired this new kid, maybe 19 years old. He was on drive-through one night, and I was counting the safe in the office. He comes running back to me, eyes wide, asking if someone was outside messing with him. Said there was clear knocking on the drive-through window, 3 distinct knocks. When he looked, nobody was there. I didn't tell him that I'd heard the exact same thing at least 5 times over the past year. Same pattern, same window, same nothing when you look. But last week, I couldn't just brush it off anymore. I got in around 11:30 that night. The closing crew had left the place decent enough. I did the usual stuff, counted the safe, logged into the system, checked emails. Normal manager stuff. Around 1 in the morning, I started setting up the breakfast trays in the kitchen area. That's when it first happened. I was facing the grill, arranging the trays on the prep table when I felt, I don't know how to describe it exactly. It was like a shadow passed over me, but from behind. Like when someone much taller than you stands right behind you and you can feel their shadow washing over you. It wasn't cold exactly, but it had weight to it. It passed over my whole body in about 2 seconds, and then it was gone. I spun around immediately. Nothing there, just the empty kitchen. My heart was racing. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was just the lights flickering or something, but the lights weren't flickering. Maybe I was just tired. I decided to take a break and headed to the office to watch the security cameras for a bit. The office is tiny, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with a desk and the safe and all the monitors. I sat there watching the empty restaurant on the screens. Nobody in the lobby, nobody in the drive-thru, nobody in the kitchen, just me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept glancing at the camera that showed the hallway outside the office door. Nothing there. But every few minutes, I'd get this overwhelming feeling that if I turned around, someone would be standing in the doorway. I refused to look. After about half an hour, I was getting hungry, so I made myself a quarter-pounder and some fries. I ate in the office, still watching the cameras. Nothing unusual. I started to feel a little better. Maybe I was just being paranoid because I was alone in the building. Around 2:30, I knew I needed to start on the dishes if I was going to finish everything before the morning crew arrived at 5. The dish area is in the very back of the kitchen with the 3-compartment sink and the sprayer. There's no camera back there. I had been washing dishes for maybe 15 minutes when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Just a slight shift, like someone stepping into the doorway of the dish area. I turned, expecting to see. I don't know what I expected. But what I saw was, it wasn't solid enough to be a person. It was like a shadow, but with dimension. A dark outline that was vaguely person-shaped, taller than me by at least a foot. No clear features, just this dark presence. I dropped the spatula I was washing. It clattered into the sink. The shape didn't move. It just stood there. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I just stared at it. And it seemed to be staring back at me, even though it didn't have eyes that I could see. Then it moved, not toward me, thank God, but to the side, like it was stepping back into the kitchen. That broke my paralysis. I bolted. I didn't even think about it. I ran straight through the kitchen, through the lobby, and out the front door. I didn't even grab my coat, and it was freezing outside, maybe 20 degrees. I just needed to get out. Standing in the parking lot, shivering, I pulled out my phone and called my brother. He works nights too at a warehouse across town, and I knew he'd be awake. Plus, when we were teenagers, he had some weird experiences himself. Claimed he saw figures in our basement that weren't there. I never believed him back then. "Hello?" He answered on the third ring. "Kyle, I need you to just talk to me for a minute," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm at work, and something really fucking weird just happened, and I'm standing in the parking lot freezing my ass off because I'm scared to go back inside." "Whoa, slow down. Are you okay? Did someone break in?" "No, not a person. I saw something in the dish area, like a shadow, but it was standing there. It was watching me." There was a pause, like a ghost. "I don't know what it was," my voice cracked, "but I'm not making it up, and it wasn't just that. Earlier, I felt something pass over me, like a shadow with weight to it." Okay, I believe you. Where are you right now exactly?" "In the McDonald's parking lot. All my stuff is still inside. My keys, my coat. I have to go back in." "Is there anyone else you can call to come be with you?" "At 3 in the morning? No, and I can't just leave. I'm the manager. I have to finish my shift." He was quiet for a moment. "All right, here's what we're going to do. Stay on the phone with me. Go back inside, grab your stuff, and then decide if you want to stay or not." I took a deep breath. "Okay. I'm right here. I'm not hanging up." I walked back to the door, my phone pressed to my ear. The restaurant looked normal through the glass doors. Lights on. Empty. "I'm going in," I said. "I'm right here." I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The lobby was silent. I could see through to the kitchen. Nothing moving. "I'm inside," I whispered, though I don't know why I was whispering. "Good. Where's your stuff?" "In the office, and I need to get some things from the freezer for breakfast prep." "Okay, go to the office first." I walked through the lobby, through the kitchen. Every shadow made me jump. Every slight noise made my heart race, but I made it to the office and grabbed my coat and keys. "Got my stuff," I told Kyle, "but I still need to get things from the freezer." "Where's the freezer?" "Back by where I saw it." "Do you have to go there right now? Can it wait?" I checked the time. 3:20. "No, I need to get the breakfast stuff out to thaw." "Okay, I'm still here." The walk to the freezer felt like it took forever. Every step was an effort. The freezer is a walk-in with a heavy door and a safety latch on the inside. I've always hated going in there alone, even before all this. "I'm at the freezer," I told Kyle. "I'm scared it's going to, I don't know, lock me in or something." "That's not going to happen, but leave the door propped open if it makes you feel better." I did, using a milk crate to hold the door. I rushed in, grabbed the boxes of sausage and egg that needed to thaw, and hurried out. Nothing happened. No shadows. No presence. "Got it," I said, feeling slightly relieved. "Good. Now what?" I looked around the kitchen. The dishes were still there, half done. The breakfast prep was waiting, but the thought of staying there alone for 2 more hours made me feel sick. "I don't know if I can stay," I admitted. "Then don't. Call your boss. Tell them you got sick. It's not worth it." I hesitated. I've never just left in the middle of a shift before. There's a first time for everything, especially when there's something in there with you that shouldn't be. He was right. I called my district manager, woke her up, and told her I had gotten violently ill and needed to leave. She wasn't happy, but she said she'd call someone else in to finish the shift. I locked up and got the hell out of there. Even after I got home, I couldn't shake the chills. I kept seeing that shadow figure in my mind, kept feeling that presence washing over me. Kyle came over after his shift ended and we talked until morning. He suggested I start recording video on my phone during my shifts, try to catch something on camera. "You can't just keep ignoring it," he said. "That clearly isn't working. I'm scheduled for overnight again tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to do. I need this job, but there's something in that McDonald's, something dark, and it seems to be getting bolder. What scares me most is that I don't think it's going to just watch next time. Story 8. I've never shared this publicly before, but recent events have made me reflect on my childhood experiences. I was only 3 years old when it started, but the memories are still crystal clear to me, even decades later. It happened back in 1983, and I've spent most of my life trying to make sense of it. My Uncle John died suddenly from a heart attack that spring. I was too young to really understand what was happening, but I remember the house being filled with hushed voices and my mom crying in the bathroom when she thought no one could hear. Since I was only 3, my parents decided I shouldn't attend the funeral. Instead, I stayed with my grandmother while everyone else went. That night, after they returned home, I was sleeping in bed with my mom. My dad was working the night shift at the factory, so it was just the two of us. I remember waking up around midnight feeling different. It's hard to explain, but it was like a warm current was running through my body. I sat up and looked at my mom, who was still awake, flipping through a photo album with tears streaming down her face. What happened next has haunted my mother for years. I turned to face her, but it didn't feel like I was in control. My body felt heavy, like someone else was wearing it. My mouth opened, and words came out that weren't mine. "Hello, Lindy. Tell Vicky I'm okay and stop crying so much." My mom dropped the photo album and stared at me, her face completely white. She told me later that my voice had changed completely, deeper, more mature, with a slight rasp to it, just like Uncle John's voice. Here's the thing. Nobody called my mom Lindy except for Uncle John. Everyone else called her Linda, and Vicky was Uncle John's girlfriend who had been inconsolable since his death. How could I have known any of this? I was 3 years old and had barely even met Vicky. My mom grabbed me by the shoulders and started shaking me, asking me what I had said, but I didn't remember saying anything. I just started crying because she was scaring me. She held me tight that night, and I could feel her heart racing against my back. The next morning, she asked me if I remembered talking to her during the night. I didn't. She asked me if I knew who Vicky was, and I shook my head. When she showed me a picture of Uncle John and asked who it was, I just said uncle and went back to playing with my toys. For a few weeks, things were normal again. Then one afternoon, I was playing in the living room with my toy telephone, one of those plastic ones with the rotary dial and the little bell inside. Mom was washing dishes in the kitchen, and I was having an animated conversation on my toy phone. Mom said she started listening when she heard me mention the yellow dress with the flowers. She dried her hands and came into the living room, watching me as I nodded and laughed into the plastic receiver. "The time you fell in the pond and got all muddy," I said, giggling, "and when the ducks chased you all the way to the car." My mom slowly sat down on the couch, her face pale again. I kept talking into the phone about a picnic at Miller's Park and how someone had forgotten the sandwiches but brought extra watermelon. Finally, Mom asked me who I was talking to. I held up my finger, just a minute, and then asked into the phone, "What's your name again?" I listened for a moment, then turned to my mom. "She says her name is Georgia. She knows you." Mom started crying. Georgia had been her best friend since high school and my godmother. She had died from a brain aneurysm 6 months before I was born. The yellow dress with flowers was what Georgia wore to Mom's wedding. The pond incident had happened on a girls' trip they took in college. The picnic at Miller's Park was the last time they'd seen each other, 2 weeks before Georgia died. I'd never been told any of these stories. There were no photos of these events in our house. I couldn't possibly have known any of this. When Mom asked me to give the phone to her, I handed it over matter-of-factly. She put it to her ear with shaking hands, but of course heard nothing. When she gave it back to me, I listened for a moment and then said, "She had to go, but she says she loves you and she's sorry she missed my birthday." Mom left the room, and I could hear her crying again. I didn't understand why she was upset. In my 3-year-old mind, I just had a nice conversation with someone named Georgia, who knew my mom. It seemed perfectly normal to me. After that, Mom started watching me more closely. She'd catch me talking to invisible friends and ask who they were. Sometimes I'd give names of people she recognized. old neighbors who had passed away, a great aunt I'd never met. Other times I'd just shrug and say I didn't know their names, but they were nice and wanted to talk. The most vivid experience happened when I was 5. My mom's oldest brother, Uncle Pete, committed suicide after struggling with depression for years. This time, I was old enough to attend the funeral. I remember wearing an itchy black dress and shiny shoes that hurt my feet. The church was full of flowers that made my nose tickle, and everyone was wearing dark colors and speaking in whispers. My cousins were all crying, and I couldn't understand why. Uncle Pete was standing right there in the corner, watching everyone with a sad look on his face. I tugged on my oldest cousin David's sleeve and pointed. "Why is everyone crying? Uncle Pete is right there." David looked down at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Don't say that, Emma. It's not funny." "But he is," I insisted, pointing more emphatically. "He's wearing his blue plaid shirt and his work boots, the ones with the paint splatter on the toe." David's face went slack. Uncle Pete had been buried in his Sunday suit, but he almost always wore that blue plaid shirt, and he did have work boots with white paint on them from when he helped my parents paint their living room. "Stop it," David hissed, grabbing my arm. "Just stop it." I pulled away from him, confused and hurt. Why didn't they believe me? Uncle Pete was right there, plain as day, looking at all of us with such sadness in his eyes. When he saw me looking at him, he gave a small wave. I slipped away from the group and found a coat closet in the hallway of the church. I closed myself inside, among the musty-smelling coats, and sat on the floor. "Uncle Pete?" I whispered. "Are you there?" The air in front of me shimmered slightly, and then he was sitting cross-legged on the floor opposite me, just like we used to sit when he'd visit and play Candyland with me. "Hey, pumpkin," he said, his voice sounding echoey and distant like he was talking through water. "Why can't anyone else see you?" I asked. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I'm dead, Emma. Do you know what that means?" I nodded solemnly. "It means you went away forever." "That's right, but for some reason, you can still see me. Not everyone can do that. It's a special thing you can do, at least for now." "For now?" I repeated. "Most kids lose it as they get older," he explained. "They stop believing in things they can't explain, so treasure it while you have it." I reached out to touch his hand, but mine passed right through his. It felt like sticking my fingers into a cloud of cold mist. "Why did you go away?" I asked, my bottom lip trembling. His face crumpled. "I was very sad, Pumpkin. Sometimes grown-ups get so sad they can't see any way to feel better. It was a mistake. I wish I hadn't done it." "Can you come back?" He shook his head slowly. "No, once you're dead, you stay dead. But I'm not hurting anymore, and that's good." I heard my mom calling my name outside the closet. Uncle Pete put a finger to his lips. "Don't tell them you talked to me," he whispered. "They won't understand, and it might scare them. It's okay that you can see me, but it's our secret, okay?" I nodded, just as the closet door opened and my mom peered in, looking frantic. "Emma, what are you doing in here? We've been looking everywhere for you." I looked back at where Uncle Pete had been sitting, but he was gone. I let my mom pull me out of the closet and back to the service. That conversation with Uncle Pete marked a turning point for me. It was the first time I truly understood what death meant, and it was also the first time I realized that what I could do wasn't normal. I started keeping my conversations private after that, but just like Uncle Pete predicted, my ability began to fade as I got older. By the time I was 7, the spirits became more transparent, harder to hear. By 8, they were just fleeting glimpses out of the corner of my eye. By 9, they were gone entirely. I mourned that loss deeply, though I never told anyone. How do you explain to someone that you miss seeing dead people, that those conversations had felt as real and important as any I had with the living? Sometimes I wonder if my brain just made up those experiences as a way to process grief at a young age. But then I remember the specific details I knew, about George's yellow dress, about Uncle John calling my mom Lindy, about Uncle Pete's paint-splattered boots, things a child couldn't have invented. I'm 39 now with kids of my own. My oldest daughter started talking to invisible friends when she was 3, describing people she couldn't possibly have known. My heart froze the first time she pointed to an empty corner of her bedroom and said, "The lady with the yellow dress is here again. She says she's your fairy godmother." I didn't tell her about Georgia. I just asked what else the lady said, and my daughter replied, "She says to tell you she still loves you and she's sorry she missed your wedding too." I still don't know what to make of any of it. All I know is that for a brief window of my childhood, the line between the living and the dead didn't exist for me. And sometimes, when I look at my daughter having animated conversations with empty air, I wonder if that window is opening again. Story 9. I've been driving trucks for 15 years now, seen just about everything you can see on American highways, accidents, road rage, lot lizards, you name it. But what happened last week? I still can't make sense of it. Part of me doesn't want to write this down because saying it out loud makes it feel more real. But I need to get this off my chest because I haven't slept right since. It was supposed to be a routine haul from Dallas to Sacramento. I've done this route dozens of times. Left Texas around 3 in the afternoon, planning to drive through the night like I usually do. The first several hours were completely normal, some traffic around El Paso, but after that, just open highway through New Mexico and into Arizona. By 2 in the morning, I was deep into the Arizona desert on I-10. This stretch is about as remote as it gets, miles between exits, no streetlights, just you and your headlights cutting through absolute darkness. I hadn't seen another car for at least 40 minutes. I had the radio on for a while, but lost the signal about an hour back, so it was just me and the hum of my engine. At exactly 2:13, I remember checking my dashboard clock. I noticed headlights appear in my mirrors. Didn't think much of it at first. The road had been empty, but obviously other people drive at night too. But then I realized they were coming up fast, really fast. And then suddenly those headlights turned into flashing blue and red lights. My first thought was, what the hell? I'm not speeding. I'd had my cruise control set at 65 for the last 100 miles. I wasn't weaving, hadn't blown through any stops. But you don't argue with cops, especially not when you're a trucker. One bad report can mess with your livelihood. So I signaled and pulled over onto the shoulder. The cruiser stopped about 20 feet behind me. I could see it in my mirrors, but something was off. The light bar was flashing, but the pattern seemed wrong somehow. Too slow, maybe. And the cruiser itself, I couldn't make out the markings or even what model it was, just a dark shape with those lights. I rolled down my window, grabbed my license and registration, and waited and waited. Nobody got out of the cruiser for what felt like forever. That's when I started getting nervous. Cops don't usually take this long to approach. Finally, I saw a figure emerge and walk toward my truck. Even from the side mirror, I could tell this guy was tall, like abnormally tall. Had to be at least 6'6", maybe more. He was wearing what looked like a police uniform, but again, something seemed wrong. It was too dark to make out any insignia or department patches. The officer approached my door and I leaned out a bit. "Evening, officer. Was I doing something wrong?" Nothing. No response. He just stood there, his face obscured by the brim of his hat and the darkness. He had one hand resting on his holstered gun. That sent a chill right through me. "Officer?" I tried again. "Is there a problem with my truck, my speed?" Still nothing, just standing there, silent, that hand on his gun. I started to get seriously freaked out. This wasn't normal procedure. Any cop who's ever pulled me over has at least said something, asked for license and registration, told me why they stopped me. But this guy, nothing. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you're not going to tell me why you pulled me over, I'm going to have to call dispatch and report this stop. I have a schedule to keep." That's when he finally moved. He stepped closer to my window, close enough that I should have been able to see his face clearly. But I couldn't. It was like his face was just shadow. Not hidden by shadow, but made of it. Then he spoke and his voice was all wrong. It sounded hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Step out of the vehicle." "I'd rather not, sir," I said, fighting to keep my voice from shaking. "Not until you tell me why you pulled me over." His hand suddenly shot out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was like iron, cold and impossibly strong. I'm not a small guy, but I couldn't budge it an inch. "Step out of the vehicle." Each word came out like ice cracking. That's when I looked directly at his face and saw what was wrong. Where his eyes should have been, there was nothing, just empty black sockets, like someone had gouged them out. But it wasn't just empty space. It was like looking into something deeper and darker than just empty eye sockets. Pure survival instinct kicked in. I yanked my arm back with everything I had and somehow broke free of his grip. I slammed my window shut and locked my door in one motion. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the ignition, but I got the truck started and floored it. The tires spun on the gravel shoulder before catching, and I pulled back onto the highway. In my mirrors, I could see him still standing there, not running back to his cruiser, just watching me go. Then something even more impossible happened. My radio, which hadn't picked up a signal for over an hour, suddenly crackled to life. Through a burst of static, I heard a voice, the same hollow voice. "You can't run, you can't hide. Dead men tell no tales." I nearly drove off the road. How the hell was he talking through my radio? I punched the power button, but it didn't turn off. The voice continued, "I see you, John." He knew my name. How the fuck did he know my name? I yanked the radio's power cord out of the socket. The voice stopped, but I could still hear that phrase echoing in my head. Dead men tell no tales. I drove like a madman for the next 20 minutes, constantly checking my mirrors for those police lights. Nothing appeared behind me, but I didn't slow down. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might have a heart attack right there. According to my GPS, there was a rest stop coming up in about 5 miles. I needed to pull over, to catch my breath, to call someone, anyone. As I approached, I saw the blue sign for the rest area. Never been so happy to see one of those in my life. The rest stop was deserted when I pulled in. Not surprising at nearly 3 in the morning, I parked under one of the few lights in the lot, making sure I could see all around my truck. The main building was lit up, which meant it was one of those 24-hour ones with bathrooms and vending machines inside. I sat in my cab for a few minutes, trying to steady my breathing and make sense of what had happened. Maybe I'd hallucinated it, maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel, but the bruise forming on my wrist where he'd grabbed me said otherwise. Finally, I got out of the truck, making sure to lock it behind me. The night was dead silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the hum of the vending machines coming from inside the building. I jogged to the entrance, constantly looking over my shoulder. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The place was empty. No attendant behind the counter, no other travelers, just rows of vending machines and a couple of sad-looking tables. There was a payphone on the wall near the bathrooms. Thank God, I thought. I'd call Highway Patrol, report what happened. Maybe they could tell me if there were any actual officers patrolling that stretch of highway. I picked up the receiver and nothing, no dial tone. The line was dead. "Shit," I muttered, slamming it back down. I tried again with the same result. My cell phone didn't have service out here either. Too remote. I was completely cut off. I went to the counter where an attendant would normally be. There was one of those old transistor radios sitting there, the kind that runs on batteries. Maybe I could tune into an emergency frequency or something. As I reached for it, the lights flickered, once, twice, then steady again, and then the radio turned on by itself. Through a wash of static, I heard that voice again. "You can't escape, John. The road is mine. The dead are mine." I backed away from the counter, knocking over a display of travel brochures. The radio kept going. "I've been watching you for miles. I watch all of you. The lonely drivers, the midnight travelers. You're all the same in the end." The lights flickered again, and for a split second, I swear I saw a reflection in the window, that tall figure standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. "What do you want?" I shouted at the radio, feeling like I was losing my mind. The static cleared for a moment, and the voice became crystal clear. "What I always want, a soul for the road." a companion for the endless drive. The vending machines started going crazy, all of them at once dispensing products that crashed against their glass fronts. The lights were flashing on and off faster now, and with each flash I caught glimpses of that figure, now by the door, now by the bathroom, now right beside me. I ran, straight out the door and back to my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the door. Behind me, the lights in the rest stop building were flashing like a strobe now, and I could hear that voice carried on the wind. Dead men tell no tales. I got into my truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the rest stop, I looked in my mirror one last time. The building was dark now, completely dark, like it had never been lit at all, and standing in the parking lot was that tall figure, watching me go. I drove non-stop until daylight, refusing to pull over again until I hit a truck stop outside of Barstow, California. There were other people there, other trucks. I felt safer in the daylight, surrounded by witnesses. I made my delivery in Sacramento later that day, but I was a wreck, couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, checking my mirrors for police lights. I've been staying in motels since then, afraid to get back on the road at night. I've told my dispatcher I need some time off. He thinks I'm having health problems. Maybe I am. I don't know what that thing was. A ghost? Something worse? All I know is that it wasn't human, and it knew my name. It said the road was his and the dead were his too. How many others has it stopped on that lonely stretch of highway? How many didn't get away? I've been driving for 15 years and I've never been afraid of the road, until now. Because now I know that sometimes when those police lights flash behind you in the middle of nowhere, it's not the police at all. And whatever it is, it's hunting. Story 10. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. I've talked to my parents, a few close friends, even considered seeing a therapist, but I can't shake the feeling that I need to put this out there and see if anyone else has experienced something similar. I'm not a superstitious person, never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal before this happened. This all started about 2 months ago in my house. It's nothing special, just a small 2-story place in a fairly quiet urban neighborhood that I share with my roommate Caleb. We've been living here for almost a year, and until recently, it was completely normal. At first, I barely noticed anything unusual. There would be random bangs or tapping sounds that I'd hear while alone in the house. You know, the kind of noises you immediately rationalize. Pipes settling, the house cooling down at night, neighbors moving furniture. I never thought twice about them. About 6 weeks ago, we had some friends over for a board game night. It was me, Caleb, and 4 of our friends crammed around our small dining table playing Settlers of Catan. We were drinking beers, talking shit to each other, having a great time. During Caleb's turn, he got frustrated with a bad roll and tossed one of the dice toward the kitchen in mock anger. It was a yellow die, and I remember this specifically because we spent the next 15 minutes looking for it. The kitchen isn't big, maybe 12 by 14 feet with an island in the middle. The floors are dark hardwood, so a bright yellow dye should have been easy to spot. We moved the trash can, checked under the fridge, looked behind the stove. Nothing. We literally got down on our hands and knees with our phone flashlights and checked every inch of that floor. "Dude, it just vanished," my friend Jake said, laughing. We eventually gave up and finished the game with the remaining die. By the end of the night, we'd forgotten all about it. Everyone left around midnight, and Caleb went to his room while I stayed up to clean the kitchen. Around 1 in the morning, I went upstairs to use the bathroom. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "What the F are you doing in there?" I texted back, "Brushing my teeth, why?" His response made my skin crawl. "I can hear you whispering my name over and over. Stop being weird." I wasn't saying anything, not a word. And Caleb's bedroom is on the opposite side of the house from the bathroom. There's a hallway and 2 closed doors between us. Even if I was talking loudly, he shouldn't have been able to hear me. I quickly finished up and went to his room. He was sitting up in bed looking disturbed. Dude, I'm not messing around. I could hear whispering coming from the bathroom. It kept saying my name over and over. "I swear I wasn't saying anything," I told him. "I was just brushing my teeth." We both looked at each other, and I could tell he believed me. That's when I started feeling genuinely uneasy. When I got back to my bedroom, I nearly screamed. Sitting perfectly centered on my pillow was the yellow dye, the same one that had vanished in the kitchen hours earlier. I stood frozen in my doorway staring at it. I hadn't been in my room since before the game night started. Neither had anyone else. There was absolutely no way any of us could have placed it there. I took a picture of it and went straight to Caleb's room to show him. "Did you put this on my pillow?" I asked, already knowing the answer. His face went pale. "That's not possible," he said. "We couldn't even find it, remember? We ended up staying awake until 3 in the morning trying to figure out logical explanations. Maybe someone was pranking us, but nobody else had been upstairs all night. Maybe one of us found it and forgot, but we both swore we hadn't." We eventually decided we must have missed something rational, and I went back to my room to sleep, putting the dye on my nightstand. That night, I had the most vivid, terrifying dream of my life. In the dream, I woke up in my bed and immediately knew something was wrong. Every single thing in my room that could be opened was open. My closet doors were wide open, my bedroom door was open, my windows were open, even my dresser drawers were pulled out. I remember thinking very clearly, I didn't leave things like this. I tried to get up but felt paralyzed. Then the lights started flickering, not in a subtle way. They were flashing violently, like a strobe light. I heard a pop as one of the bulbs burst, and then all the doors around me started slamming shut on their own. Bang, 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 one after another. The ceiling fan above my bed began to spin faster and faster until it was just a blur. I could hear the motor straining, the mounting bracket creaking. Then, with a horrible metallic screech, the entire fan broke free from the ceiling and crashed down, not onto me, but through the wall beside my bed, leaving a massive, jagged hole. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My throat was raw, like I'd been screaming, and my muscles ached like I'd been tensed up for hours. But the room was completely normal. Closet closed, windows shut, ceiling fan intact. I checked the time, 5:30 in the morning. There was no way I was going back to sleep, so I just lay there, trying to convince myself it was just a nightmare. When the sun came up, I got out of bed feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. I went to grab some clothes from my dresser when something caught my eye, a thin crack in the wall next to my bed, exactly where the ceiling fan had smashed through in my dream. I ran my fingers over it. The crack wasn't just in the paint. I could feel it in the drywall beneath. It ran from about a foot above my nightstand almost to the ceiling, maybe 3 feet long. That crack hadn't been there the day before. I'm absolutely certain of it. I took a picture and showed Caleb when he woke up. He didn't remember hearing anything during the night, but agreed the crack was new. We checked the ceiling fan, and it was secured properly. No sign that it had moved or that anything had hit the wall. Over the next few days, things escalated. Objects would move when we weren't looking. We'd put our keys on the counter and find them in the refrigerator. The TV would turn on by itself at exactly 3:12 every morning, always to static. One night I got up to get some water and found all the kitchen cabinets open, every single one. I closed them, stood there for a minute trying to calm my racing heart, then turned around to see them all open again. I hadn't heard a sound. The worst was what happened with the dye. I'd put it in my desk drawer, but it kept showing up in different places, on the bathroom sink, in the cereal box, inside my shoe. Once I even found it balanced perfectly on top of my bedroom doorknob. A week after game night, Caleb and I were sitting in the living room watching a movie when we both heard clear footsteps upstairs. Heavy, deliberate steps moving from my bedroom to the bathroom and back. We looked at each other, and I could see he was as terrified as I was. "There's someone up there," he whispered. We grabbed the nearest weapons we could find, a baseball bat for me, a kitchen knife for him, and slowly went upstairs together. The footsteps continued the entire time, not trying to hide or responding to our presence at all. When we reached the top of the stairs, the footsteps stopped. We checked every room, every closet, under the beds, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. The house was empty except for us. That night, I woke up around 2 in the morning to find someone standing at the foot of my bed. I could only see a dark silhouette, but it was clearly human-shaped. I couldn't move or speak. Classic sleep paralysis, I thought. But then it moved closer to me, leaning down until its face was inches from mine. I still couldn't see features, just darkness where a face should be, but I could feel its breath on my skin, hot and smelling of something rotten. When I could finally move again, I switched on my lamp, and the figure was gone. The yellow dye was on my chest. The next day, Caleb announced he was going to stay with his girlfriend for a while. I didn't blame him. I would have left too if I had somewhere to go. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been alone in the house since then, and things have only gotten worse. The whispers have gotten louder. Sometimes they say my name, sometimes they're in a language I don't understand. The dye appears in impossible places. Inside a sealed box of crackers, frozen in the center of an ice cube, buried in a potted plant. 2 nights ago, I set up my phone to record while I slept. In the morning, I found 3 hours of normal footage followed by static. Then the image of the yellow dye sitting alone in the center of my empty bed. The timestamp showed this happened while I was downstairs making breakfast. Last night, I dreamed of the ceiling fan again. This time, when it crashed through the wall, I could see something on the other side. Not another room of the house, but somewhere else entirely. A vast, dark space filled with countless yellow dice, all floating and spinning slowly in the darkness. I woke up to find the crack in my wall had grown wider. I can now fit my fingers into it, and when I do, the wall feels warm, almost hot to the touch. I don't know what to do anymore. I've tried talking to the previous tenants, but they claim nothing unusual ever happened to them. I've researched the history of the house and found nothing remarkable. I've even tried addressing whatever is here directly, asking it what it wants. The only response I've gotten is the dye, which I found this morning balanced on the edge of that crack in my wall. I don't know what's happening or why, but I know it's real. The crack is getting bigger every day, and I'm terrified of what might come through if it opens completely. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. Has anyone experienced anything like this? Does anyone know what could be happening? I need help because every time I look at that crack now, I swear I can see something yellow moving on the other side. Story 11. I've never shared this with anyone outside my closest friends, but after finding this community, I think it's time. What happened to me on Route 17 last year still keeps me up at night, and I'm hoping writing it down might help me process it somehow. I've worked at Mel's Diner for almost 4 years now. It's nothing fancy, just your typical small-town greasy spoon where everyone knows your name and your order. The late shift usually ends at 1 in the morning, and I'm always dead on my feet by the time I clock out. I live about 30 minutes outside of town, and there are 2 ways to get home. The interstate, which is always under construction and adds an extra 15 minutes to my drive, or Route 17. Route 17 used to be the main highway before they built the interstate back in the 70s. It's this narrow 2-lane road that winds through the foothills, and honestly, it's beautiful during the day. At night though, different story. There's something unsettling about it. No streetlights, barely any guardrails, and these abandoned buildings every few miles. Old motels with caved-in roofs, gas stations with rusted pumps, that kind of thing. Like driving through a graveyard of the American dream or something. People around here have stories about Route 17, missing travelers, strange lights, cars breaking down for no reason. I always brushed it off as small-town folklore. Every rural place needs its boogeyman, right? I'd taken that road dozens of times after work without incident. It was just a faster way home. That night, October 27th, started like any other. My shift had been particularly rough. We had a bus full of drunk college kids stop in around 11, and they left the place a mess. I was exhausted and just wanted to get home, shower, and fall into bed. When I finally clocked out at 1:15, the parking lot was empty except for my car. A 98 Chevy Malibu that's seen better days but gets me where I need to go. The night was unusually dark, no moon, just stars scattered across the sky like someone had flicked paint onto black canvas. I remember checking my phone before pulling out of the lot. My roommate had texted asking if I could pick up milk on my way home, but everything was closed at that hour. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and turned onto the main road. When I reached the fork where I needed to choose between the interstate and Route 17, I barely hesitated before taking the right turn onto 17. The road was completely empty, which wasn't unusual for that time of night. My headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, and I cranked up the radio to keep myself alert. It was some late-night talk show, people calling in with their conspiracy theories. Normally, I'd find it amusing, but that night it just added to the eerie atmosphere. I was about 20 minutes into my drive when I passed mile marker 43. I remember this specifically because the reflective paint caught my headlights, momentarily blinding me, and that's when everything changed. It's hard to describe exactly what happened. The air inside my car suddenly felt heavy, like the pressure had changed. My ears popped, and I felt this weight on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I rolled down my window thinking maybe I needed fresh air, but it didn't help. The air outside felt just as thick, almost syrupy. The radio started crackling with static, the voices fading in and out. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I had this knot in my stomach that I couldn't explain. Nothing had happened yet, but every instinct in my body was screaming that something was wrong. I considered turning around, but there was nowhere to safely make a U-turn, and the thought of stopping on that dark road suddenly seemed worse than continuing forward. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing on the side of the road, just standing there. No car nearby, no house in sight, just a solitary figure at the edge of my headlights. He wore what looked like a dark coat, tattered at the edges. His arms hung limply at his sides. As I got closer, I could see he wasn't moving at all, not even swaying slightly like a normal person would while standing. He was completely still, like a mannequin someone had placed there. I slowed down instinctively, though every fiber of my being told me not to stop. As I drove past him, he turned his head, just his head, not his body, and looked directly at me. His eyes. God, I'll never forget his eyes. They weren't human. I don't mean they were a strange color or anything that simple. They were empty, not hollow like eye sockets, but like looking into nothingness, like staring into a void that somehow stared back. And they followed me perfectly as I drove past, his head rotating unnaturally to maintain eye contact until I was out of sight. I floored it. My old Chevy protested but picked up speed, and I was doing 70 on a road where 50 is pushing it. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I would see him there, somehow in the road behind me, but there was nothing but darkness. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was some homeless guy. Maybe the weird look in his eyes was just a trick of the light. Maybe I was overtired and my mind was playing tricks on me. I forced myself to slow down a little, to take deep breaths. That's when I saw her. About 10 minutes further down the road, there was a woman standing in the middle of my lane, not on the shoulder, directly in the path of my car. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the asphalt. I came to a stop maybe 15 feet from her. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react at all to the car barreling toward her. She wore what might have once been a dress, now torn and dirty. Her hair was matted, hanging in front of her face, but not enough to hide her expression. Her eyes were wide open but vacant, staring through me rather than at me. Her mouth was frozen in what looked like a silent scream. But the worst part, she wasn't breathing. I know that sounds impossible to notice from inside a car, but in that moment I was hyper-focused on her and her chest wasn't moving. I sat there, engine idling, frozen with indecision. Should I try to help her, call someone? But who would I call out here where there's no cell service? As I reached for my phone anyway, I looked back up. She was gone, not like she'd walked away. She had vanished. 1 second she was there, the next she wasn't. I even rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was hallucinating from fatigue. But no, the road was empty. I put the car in park and just sat there for a minute, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. That's when the fog started rolling in. It came from nowhere, thick white mist that enveloped my car within seconds. It was so dense I could barely see past my hood. I turned on my high beams, but that only made it worse, the light reflecting back at me, blinding me. And then I saw the lights. They started as pinpricks in the fog, small orbs of bluish-white light that floated around my car. At first, I thought they were reflections, but they moved independently, swirling in patterns that felt deliberate. They would approach the car, hover near the windows as if examining me, then dart away. Some were as small as fireflies, others the size of basketballs. They made no sound, left no trail, they just existed, defying everything I knew about physics. I put the car back in drive and started moving forward slowly, hoping to get out of whatever bizarre pocket of weirdness I'd stumbled into. The orbs followed, some keeping pace with my car, others zooming ahead only to circle back. Time started to feel wrong. I checked the clock on my dashboard, 1:55. I drove for what felt like 20 minutes and checked again, 1:57. Another eternity of driving, 1:59. Route 17 isn't that long. Even at a crawl, I should have reached my exit by then, but the road just stretched on and on through the fog, the same trees, the same occasional abandoned building looming out of the mist. I began to wonder if I was driving in circles somehow, but that was impossible. It's a straight road with only gentle curves. Every time I checked my rearview mirror, I saw shapes in the fog behind me. Sometimes it looked like the man in the coat, sometimes the woman in the torn dress, sometimes just vague humanoid figures standing in the middle of the road, watching my car drive away. But whenever I hit the brakes and turned around to look, there was nothing there. My radio had devolved into pure static by this point, occasionally broken by what sounded like voices speaking words I couldn't understand. Not in a foreign language, but like English that had been stretched and distorted until it was unrecognizable. I finally turned it off, preferring the silence to those not quite voices. I don't know how long I drove like that. It felt like hours. My gas gauge was getting dangerously low, and I was starting to panic about being stranded on that road when I finally saw it, an exit sign looming out of the fog. I didn't even care where it led. I just needed to get off Route 17. I took the exit, my tires screeching as I probably took the turn too fast. The moment I left the main road, the fog began to thin. The lights disappeared. The pressure in my ears released with a pop that was almost painful, and suddenly I could breathe normally again. The clock on my dashboard jumped from 2:03 to 4:37 right before my eyes. I didn't recognize where I was at first. The exit had put me on a county road I'd never driven before, but my GPS finally had signal again and directed me home. I pulled into my driveway just as dawn was breaking, exhausted and still shaking. My roommate was already up making coffee when I walked in. She took one look at me and asked if I was okay. I must have looked terrible. I told her I'd taken a wrong turn and gotten lost, which wasn't entirely a lie. I couldn't bring myself to explain what had really happened. Not then, not ever. I called in sick to work that day, and the next. When I finally went back, I started taking only day shifts. I haven't driven Route 17 since that night, and I never will again, no matter how much time it adds to my commute. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I think about those figures. Are they still there, standing on that lonely stretch of road? Are they waiting for the next driver who decides to take the shortcut home? Or were they only there for me? And why? I've researched Route 17 since then. There are old newspaper articles about disappearances along that highway going back decades. People who set out on trips and never arrived. Abandoned cars found with no sign of the drivers. Most were written off as runaways or accidents where the bodies were never recovered. But now I wonder if they encountered what I did, only they didn't make it to an exit. I still don't know what happened to me that night. Was it a mass hallucination, some kind of waking dream? Or is there something truly wrong with that stretch of road? I have no answers, only the certainty that what I experienced was real and the knowledge that I'll never set tires on Route 17 again. Story 12. I still can't sleep with the lights off. It's been 8 years since we fled that house, but I swear sometimes I still see those shadows in the corner of my eye. I've tried therapy, meditation, even hypnosis, but nothing erases what happened. I guess writing it down might help, though I doubt anyone will believe me. I barely believe it myself sometimes. I was 12 when we moved into that suburban nightmare in Oakwood Heights. From the outside, it looked so normal. 2 stories, brick facade, decent yard. Mom got it for a surprisingly good deal, which should have been our first warning. But we were just happy to have a place with enough bedrooms after the divorce. My name is Charity, and back then, my only real friends were my mice. I had 6 of them, small white ones with pink eyes that I'd raised from babies. My older sister Rachel thought they were disgusting, but I loved them. They were the only living things that didn't judge me or make fun of my second-hand clothes or the fact that I preferred books to people. Mom sold wigs for a living, custom hair pieces for women with alopecia or going through chemo, but also fashion wigs for people who just wanted to change their look. She'd have these wig parties at our house where ladies would come over, drink wine, and try on different styles. I usually hid in my room or the attic during these events, playing with my mice and avoiding the noise. The first really strange thing happened about 2 months after we moved in. Mom was hosting one of her biggest wig parties yet. About 15 women crowded in our living room, sipping cheap champagne and modeling blonde bobs and brunette waves. I was in the attic with my favorite mouse, Whiskers. I had a little maze set up for him on an old table, and he was happily running through it while I timed him. I looked away for maybe 5 seconds to check my stopwatch, and when I looked back, Whiskers was gone. Just gone. The attic door was closed. The windows were sealed shut. There was nowhere he could have gone. I frantically searched every corner, moved every box, but he had completely vanished. Then I heard screaming downstairs. I raced down to find absolute chaos in the living room. Women were standing on chairs, spilling drinks, and one lady had even jumped on our coffee table. And there, in the middle of the beige carpet, was Whiskers, looking confused as he scurried between feet and fallen wigs. It makes no sense. My mouse had been locked in the attic with me 1 second, and the next he was downstairs among 15 screaming women. It was physically impossible. Mom was furious. She managed to catch Whiskers and handed him to me with a grip so tight I thought she might crush him. Her face was this weird mix of anger and fear I'd never seen before. "Keep your disgusting rats away from my clients," she hissed. But something in her eyes told me she was more freaked out than angry. Mom had never spoken to me like that before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how Whiskers had teleported through solid floors. I tried to convince myself there must be some logical explanation. Maybe he'd found a hole in the wall, a secret passage or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. He'd disappeared and reappeared in seconds. About a week later, something even worse happened. I kept my mice in a large wire cage with a padlock, partly to keep them safe and partly because Mom insisted after the wig incident. The cage sat on my dresser, and I always made sure it was secure. I came home from school one day and went straight to my room to feed them. What I found still makes me sick to my stomach. All 6 of my mice, including the 3 babies that had been born just 2 weeks earlier, were dead, massacred. There was blood everywhere, little bodies torn apart, and inside the cage was the largest rat I'd ever seen, with matted black fur and eyes that seemed to follow me as I screamed. The lock was on the floor, not broken, just removed and placed neatly beside the cage. The rat must have weighed at least a pound. There's no way it could have slipped through the wire gaps, and it certainly couldn't have unlocked a padlock. When Mom came running in, the rat was gone, just vanished, like it had never been there. All that remained was the carnage of my pets and that unlocked padlock mocking me from the floor. Mom didn't believe me about the rat. She thought maybe the mice had fought each other, which anyone who knows anything about pet mice would tell you is ridiculous, especially considering the size of the wounds. After that, things escalated quickly. Pictures would fly off walls for no reason. Once, a framed family photo shot across the dining room during dinner and smashed against my head. leaving me with a cut that needed 3 stitches. The doctor at the ER gave Mom suspicious looks, probably thinking she'd thrown it at me. My sister Rachel was always messy, leaving her stuff everywhere, playing her music too loud, and never giving me a moment's peace, so I decided to move my bedroom to the unfinished basement. Mom wasn't thrilled, but I convinced her I needed my own space away from Rachel. The basement was cold and damp, with concrete floors and exposed pipes, but it was mine. That's when I started seeing them. The shadows. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, dark shapes moving along the walls that didn't match any light source. They always appeared in my peripheral vision, disappearing when I tried to look directly at them, but over time, they became bolder. I remember one night waking up to the feeling of being watched. My basement bedroom was pitch black, but I could sense something moving around me. I reached for my flashlight, and when I turned it on, the shadows scattered like cockroaches. But they didn't disappear. They hovered at the edges of the light, pulsing and shifting. And then they started to take form. Not fully human, but humanoid. Elongated limbs, featureless faces, fingers that stretched too long. They would dart along the walls, crawling on the ceiling, sometimes reaching toward me, but never quite touching. I tried telling Mom, but she was stressed about money and thought I was making it up for attention. Rachel just called me a freak, so I started sleeping with all the lights on, which only seemed to make the shadows more determined. They found corners, spaces behind furniture, anywhere darkness could gather. The worst night was when I woke up to them standing around my bed, 5 or 6 shadow figures just watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. One of them reached out and I felt something cold brush my cheek. Not a physical touch, more like someone had pressed an ice cube against my skin without the wetness. I lay there paralyzed until morning, when they finally melted away with the sunrise. After that, I refused to sleep in the basement. I dragged my mattress into Rachel's room and slept on her floor, despite her complaints. The shadows followed me though. They were more subtle upstairs, but I could still see them darting around corners, hiding in closets, watching. Things came to a breaking point during one of Mum's wig parties. She had important clients over, women with actual money who could make big orders. I was helping serve drinks, trying to be useful, when every single picture on the living room wall suddenly flew across the room, narrowly missing the clients. At the same moment, all the wigs on the display stands shot upward, hitting the ceiling before dropping back down on screaming women. One client, a church deacon's wife, looked at Mom with wide eyes and said, "Your house is haunted, Sylvia. You need help." Mom, desperate and terrified, called our local church the next day. Father Matthews came over that evening with holy water and a Bible. He was a kind older man who I don't think had ever done an exorcism before, but he was willing to try. He went through the house room by room, praying and sprinkling holy water. When he reached the basement, he asked to go alone. Mom, Rachel, and I waited upstairs, huddled together on the couch, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. Father Matthews was down there for almost an hour. When he finally came back up, his face was deathly pale and his hands were shaking so badly he dropped his Bible on the floor. His clerical collar was askew, and there was a tear in his black shirt that hadn't been there before. "You need to leave this house," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Now, tonight. Don't pack, don't take anything. Just go." Mom tried to ask what had happened, what he'd seen, but he just shook his head. "Whatever is here," he said, "it won't leave. It's attached to this place. It's not a ghost. It's something older." We were scared, but Mom couldn't just abandon our home and all our possessions. She decided we'd go pack some essentials and then stay at a motel for a few days while she figured things out. Father Matthews begged us not to go back inside, but Mom was stubborn. The 3 of us went back in together, sticking close. The house felt different, colder, like all the air had been sucked out. The shadows I'd been seeing for months were now visible to all of us, slithering across walls and gathering in corners. We made it to the bedrooms and started throwing clothes into bags. That's when it happened. Every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously. The lights flickered and died, and in the darkness I could hear something dragging itself across the floor toward us. Rachel screamed as her hairbrush flew off her dresser and hit her in the face. Mom's jewelry box exploded, sending earrings and necklaces flying like shrapnel. My backpack was ripped from my hands and thrown against the ceiling. We just ran, leaving everything behind except the clothes on our backs and the few things we'd managed to stuff in our pockets. As we burst through the front door, I swear I heard laughter coming from every room of the house. Not human laughter, but something ancient and cruel. We stayed in a motel that night, and Mom used her credit card to rent us a small apartment the next day. She went back to the house once more with 2 male colleagues to try to retrieve more of our things, but they only made it as far as the living room before objects started flying at their heads. They fled too. A month later, Mom finally learned the truth about our house. It had been donated to a local church 8 years earlier by an elderly woman who wouldn't say why she was giving away a perfectly good property. The church had used it briefly as a youth ministry center until 2 priests were found murdered inside, their throats slashed and strange symbols drawn in blood on the walls. The police ruled it a cult killing, but they never caught anyone. After that, the church sold the property. Then those owners sold it, and the next, and the next. 5 different families had owned that house in just 2 years before we moved in. None of them stayed longer than 4 months. I sometimes drive by the old place when I'm visiting Mom. It's been sold again, and there's a new family living there now. I can see children's toys in the yard. Part of me wants to warn them, to tell them to get out before they see what we saw. But would they believe me? Would you? I still see shadows sometimes, especially when I'm alone. I tell myself it's just trauma, just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I know better. Whatever was in that house recognized something in me, and I'm afraid a piece of it followed me out. Story 13. I still can't explain what happened that night. It's been 4 months, and I've barely told anyone because it sounds completely insane. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I'm 16 and live with my parents in Westbrook on 41st Street. Nothing weird had ever happened in our house before. It's just a normal 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood. My bedroom is upstairs, directly across from my parents. That night in February, I couldn't sleep. I've been dealing with anxiety lately, school pressure, college applications looming, the usual teenage stuff. Around 4 in the morning, I was still wide awake playing Bloodborne on my PS4. My parents were asleep across the hall. I could hear my dad's faint snoring through the walls. I was pretty deep into the game, fighting one of the harder bosses. The room was dark except for the blue glow from my TV. I had my headphones on, completely absorbed in the game, when something changed in the atmosphere. It's hard to describe, but suddenly I felt watched. Like when you can sense someone staring at you from behind. The hair on my arms stood up. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just the game getting to me. Bloodborne is creepy enough on its own, but the feeling got stronger. The air felt heavier, almost pressurized, like right before a thunderstorm, and it got cold. Not just a little chilly, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to bypass my skin and settle directly into my bones. I kept playing, trying to distract myself, but I died in the game after a stupid mistake. The screen went dark during the loading sequence, and that's when I noticed my reflection in the TV, except I could see something else too, something tall standing in my doorway. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Slowly I turned around. There was something standing in my doorway. I say something because it wasn't quite a person. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and humanoid, but wrong somehow. It had a head and limbs in all the right places, but its proportions were off. Its arms hung too low, almost to its knees. The worst part was that it didn't seem fully solid. It was like looking at a person through frosted glass or dense smoke. I could make out its basic shape, but the details were blurry, shifting. I couldn't see a face. Where a face should have been was just a darker smudge, a void. but I knew it was looking at me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight. The logical part of my brain was screaming that this couldn't be real. I was tired, my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe I'd fallen asleep without realizing and was dreaming. But I knew I was awake. This was happening. I should have screamed. I should have bolted for my parents' room. But instead, I did something that still makes no sense to me. I stood up and I walked toward it. It was like being in a trance. I wasn't controlling my movements, or maybe I was, but it felt like something else was guiding me. With each step, the cold intensified. My breath came out in visible puffs, which was impossible because it was February and our heat was on. When I reached the doorway, I was close enough to see that the figure wasn't just blurry. It was vibrating slightly, like it was out of sync with reality. And then, without conscious thought, I took one more step forward. I stepped into it. What happened next is hard to describe. It's like trying to explain a color that doesn't exist. One moment I was in my bedroom doorway, and the next I was elsewhere. Not physically gone from my room. I know now that my body never left, but my consciousness was somewhere else entirely. I was in a void. That's the closest word I can find. But it's inadequate. It wasn't just darkness. It was an absence of light, sound, smell, even gravity. I couldn't feel my body. I couldn't determine if I was standing, floating, or falling. There were no walls, no floor, no ceiling, just endless nothing. But I wasn't alone there. I couldn't see them at first, but I could sense them. Presences moving through the void. Gradually, my perception adjusted, and I began to make out shapes in the darkness. They weren't quite solid, more like disturbances in the fabric of that place. They moved around me, some passing close, others keeping their distance. They seemed aware of me. I tried to speak, but I had no voice there. I tried to run, but I had nowhere to go. Time became meaningless. It could have been minutes or hours or days. All I know is that subjectively it felt eternal, and then one of the shapes approached me directly. As it drew closer, it began to take on a more defined form, the same tall, disproportionate figure I'd seen in my doorway. It didn't communicate with words. Instead, I felt a series of impressions flooding my mind, emotions and concepts that weren't my own. Curiosity, recognition, warning. The warning was the strongest, an overwhelming sense of danger, not from the entity itself, but from something else, something that was coming, or perhaps something that was already here, in our world, that I couldn't see yet. Then abruptly I was back in my bedroom doorway, gasping for air. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the carpet. I was shaking uncontrollably, teeth chattering, even though the room was now perfectly warm again. My phone showed that only 20 seconds had passed since I'd died in the game, but it had felt like hours in that other place. I crawled to my parents' room and woke them up, sobbing. They thought I'd had a nightmare. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. They brought me back to my room, checked under the bed and in the closet like I was 5 years old again, and sat with me until I calmed down enough to sleep. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a waking dream or some weird hallucination from sleep deprivation. But deep down, I knew better. What I experienced was real. Different from our reality, but real. I started researching obsessively. I looked into sleep paralysis, hallucinations, quantum physics, spiritual beliefs about other dimensions, anything that might explain what happened. Nothing quite fit until I found obscure forums where people described similar experiences, encounters with what some called the veil. According to these accounts, the veil is a sort of liminal space, a boundary layer between our world and something else. Not heaven or hell in the religious sense, but another dimension that occasionally overlaps with ours. The entities there aren't ghosts or demons. They're inhabitants of that realm. And sometimes, when conditions are right, the barrier thins enough for crossover. What makes the barrier thin? Trauma, intense emotion, certain locations, and times when the mind is particularly receptive, like the middle of the night. My anxiety that night might have created the perfect conditions. These entities are drawn to suffering, not maliciously, but out of a kind of fascination. They observe us, particularly during moments of emotional intensity. The being I encountered wasn't trying to harm me, it was trying to communicate something. Since that night, I've become hyper-aware of the thin barrier between worlds. I notice things others don't, subtle shifts in atmosphere, momentary glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision. I feel watched sometimes, especially when I'm anxious or upset, but not in a threatening way. More like I'm being monitored, checked on. I haven't seen the tall entity again, at least not clearly, but sometimes, in the moment between wakefulness and sleep, I sense it nearby, watching, waiting, warning. The experience changed me fundamentally. I can't look at reality the same way anymore. It's like I've seen behind the curtain, and now I can't unsee it. The world isn't what we think it is. It's bigger, stranger, more permeable than we realize. I still live in the same house on 41st Street. I still sleep in the same room. But I never play Bloodborne after midnight anymore, and I always keep my bedroom door closed. Sometimes I wonder if I should try to contact it again to understand what it was trying to warn me about. But then I remember the overwhelming sense of dread I felt in that place, and I decide against it. Some doors, once opened, can't be easily closed again. The scariest part isn't what happened that night. It's the growing certainty that the veil is thinning. More people are experiencing these crossovers. Something is changing in the relationship between our world and theirs. The entities are becoming more active, more visible, and I can't shake the feeling that the warning wasn't just for me, it was for all of us. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived it. But if you've experienced something similar, if you've felt that cold, seen that tall figure, or sensed the veil growing thin, please let me know, because I think whatever's coming, we need to be prepared. The entities from 41st Street are watching, and they're trying to tell us something important. Story 14. I've been sitting on this experience for almost 3 months now, and I still can't make sense of it. I'm not the type who believes in ghosts or anything supernatural. But what happened during our vacation in Greece has left me questioning everything I thought I knew. My girlfriend Maria and I had been planning this trip for over a year. We'd both been working crazy hours at our jobs and desperately needed a break. We found this gorgeous little villa on the outskirts of a small coastal town in Greece. I won't name it specifically, but it was about an hour from Athens. The place looked perfect in the photos. Whitewashed walls, blue shutters, a small private garden with a view of the Mediterranean, classic Greek charm but with modern amenities. We arrived on a Sunday afternoon in early June. The weather was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze coming in from the sea. The owner, an elderly Greek man named Kostas, showed us around. He spoke broken English but was incredibly welcoming. The villa was even better than the pictures, open and airy with beautiful tiled floors and simple, comfortable furniture. The bedroom was spacious with a queen-sized bed and doors that opened onto a small balcony. There was a wooden dresser, 2 nightstands, and a large, somewhat ornate painting of Jesus hanging on the wall opposite the bed. I'm not religious at all, and Maria was raised Catholic but isn't practicing. The painting wasn't disturbing or anything, just a standard depiction of Jesus with his hand raised in blessing. But it felt a bit intense to have him staring at us while we slept. After Kostas left, we unpacked and decided to rearrange a few things to make the place feel more like ours for the 2 weeks we'd be staying. Maria suggested we take down the painting of Jesus and store it in the closet. I was hesitant at first. It felt disrespectful somehow, but she pointed out that we weren't religious and it was our vacation rental for the next 2 weeks. So I carefully removed it from the wall and placed it in the bedroom closet, leaning it face first against the back wall. That first day was perfect. We walked around the town, had an amazing dinner at a local taverna, and came back to the villa, exhausted but happy. We fell asleep almost immediately, with the windows open to let in the sea breeze. I woke up around 3 in the morning to Maria shaking my shoulder. At first, I thought she needed to use the bathroom and wanted me to go with her. She hates walking around unfamiliar places in the dark. But when I opened my eyes, I saw her sitting up in bed, completely still, staring toward the foot of the bed. "There's someone standing there," she whispered, not taking her eyes off whatever she was seeing. I immediately sat up, my heart racing. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I felt that electric pins and needles sensation you get when you think someone's watching you. I reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. The room was empty. I got up and checked the whole villa. Doors and windows were all locked. Nothing was disturbed. Maria was visibly shaken. She described seeing a figure, a man, standing silently at the foot of our bed just watching us. She couldn't make out his face clearly, but said he was wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, something like a white shirt and dark pants. I tried to rationalize it. A dream, a shadow from outside, the unfamiliarity of a new place playing tricks on her mind. She eventually calmed down, and we managed to fall back asleep with the light on. The next day, we didn't talk much about what happened. We went to the beach, swam in the crystal clear water, ate fresh seafood, and drank too much local wine. By the time we got back to the villa that evening, we were both sunburned, pleasantly tired, and had pretty much forgotten about the previous night's scare. I fell asleep quickly that night, but sometime in the early morning hours, my phone later showed it was around 2:30. Maria woke me again. This time her voice was different, not panicked like before, but quiet and almost curious. "He's back," she said softly. "He's sitting on the edge of the bed now." I was instantly alert, but instead of immediately turning on the light like the night before, something made me pause. Maria wasn't frightened. Her body was relaxed, and she was looking at a spot at the foot of our bed with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What do you see?" I asked her, keeping my voice low. "A man," she replied. "Not the same as last night. I think it's the same person, but he's wearing different clothes. A light-colored sweater, I think." She tilted her head slightly. "He's not scary. I actually feel comfortable, like I've known him for years." This struck me as incredibly strange. Maria is usually jumpy about the smallest things. She screams if she sees a tiny spider across the room and refuses to walk past graveyards at night. For her to be calm about a stranger, or apparition, or whatever it was, in our bedroom was completely out of character. I asked, she hesitated, then nodded. When I flicked on the lamp, just like the night before, there was nothing there. The spot where she'd been looking was empty. But unlike the previous night, Maria seemed almost disappointed rather than relieved. "He's gone," she said simply. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I was thoroughly confused and, if I'm being honest, a little freaked out. Was Maria having some kind of episodes? Was there something wrong with the villa? Mold or gas that could cause hallucinations? Or was it actually possible that she was seeing something I couldn't? "This is going to sound weird," Maria finally said, "but I think I know who it might be." She told me something she'd never mentioned before. Her mother had lost a baby boy 2 years before Maria was born. It was late in the pregnancy, nearly 8 months along, when her mother went into premature labor. The baby, who they had planned to name Michael, lived for just a few hours. Maria said her family rarely talked about it, but she'd always felt a strange connection to this brother she never knew. "I think it might be him," she said quietly. "That would explain why I'm not scared, why I feel like I know him." I didn't know how to respond to that. On one hand, it seemed far-fetched. On the other, the change in Maria's reaction from terror the first night to calm recognition the second was striking, and I couldn't explain why she was seeing something I couldn't. "Do you think it has something to do with the painting?" I asked hesitantly. It was the only thing that had changed in the room before these incidents started. Maria considered this. Maybe. Or maybe he's always been around and something about this place makes it easier for me to see him. We talked until sunrise, trying to make sense of it all. Maria described more details about what she'd seen. that he looked to be in his 20s, with dark hair like hers, that he didn't try to communicate, just sat there looking peaceful, that she felt an overwhelming sense of protection coming from him. As the sun came up, we finally dozed off. When we woke later that morning, the experience had taken on an almost dreamlike quality. Had we really spent hours talking about a ghost, Maria's brother who died before she was born? It seemed absurd in the daylight. We decided not to put the painting back up, not because we were convinced it was related to what was happening, but because neither of us wanted to disrupt whatever was going on. Part of us, well, mostly Maria, was hoping he would come back, but he never did. We spent 12 more nights in that villa, and there were no more visitations, no more figures standing or sitting at the end of our bed. Maria was oddly disappointed. She'd never had a chance to know her brother, and now she felt like she'd had a brief, impossible connection with him that had been severed. On our last day, as we were packing to leave, Maria insisted on returning the painting of Jesus to its original spot on the wall. I watched as she carefully hung it, then stood back with a puzzled expression. "What is it?" I asked. "I just realized something," she said slowly. The first night, when I saw him standing at the foot of the bed, he was positioned exactly where Jesus would have been looking from the painting. And the second night, when he was sitting on the bed, it was at the exact spot where the light from the painting would have fallen if it had been hanging. A chill ran through me despite the warm Greek air coming through the open windows. I'm still not sure what to make of it all. Was it Maria's imagination, a coincidence, or was it something more? 3 months later, back home in our regular lives, we still talk about it sometimes. Maria says she doesn't regret taking down the painting. If anything, she's grateful for the experience. She feels like she got to meet her brother in some impossible way. She's even started asking her mother more questions about the baby she lost, trying to piece together this connection she feels. As for me, I don't know what to believe. I never saw anything in that room, but I believe that Maria did. There was something so genuine about her reaction, especially that second night. The lack of fear, the sense of familiarity with something that should have terrified her. I find myself wondering if we'll ever experience anything like it again, or if it was specific to that place, that painting, that moment in time. Part of me hopes we do, part of me hopes we don't, but I know one thing for certain. I'll never casually take down religious artwork in a vacation rental again. Some boundaries, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Story 15. I've been driving trucks for nearly 20 years now, and I know the rules of the road. Don't pick up hitchhikers. Don't stop in the middle of nowhere. Don't take unnecessary risks. But sometimes you break your own rules, and it changes everything. It happened 3 nights ago on Nevada's Route 375, the extraterrestrial highway. I'd been making this run for years, hauling goods between Vegas and Reno, usually taking the faster routes. But construction had forced me onto this desolate stretch of road that cuts through nothing but desert and darkness. Most drivers hate this route, but I never minded the solitude, at least not until that night. It was around midnight, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least an hour. The road stretched endlessly before me, my headlights cutting through the pitch-black desert night. The radio kept fading in and out, typical for this area with its spotty reception. I was fighting to stay alert, sipping lukewarm coffee from my thermos, when I saw her. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, maybe a desert animal, but as I got closer, my headlights illuminated a figure on the side of the road, a woman with her thumb out. My first instinct was to keep driving. Like I said, I know the rules, but something made me slow down. Maybe it was how vulnerable she looked out there, or maybe it was because being alone on that road at that hour seemed way more dangerous than being in my truck. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her. Through my side mirror, I watched her run toward the truck. Her movements were desperate, almost frantic. She was wearing jeans and a light jacket, not nearly enough for the cold desert night. When she reached my passenger door, I leaned over and pushed it open. "You all right, miss?" I asked as she climbed in. She was younger than me, probably mid-20s, with long dark hair that looked tangled and windblown. Her face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim cab light. What struck me most were her eyes, wide, alert, and absolutely terrified. "Thank you," she said breathlessly. "Thank you for stopping." Her voice had an odd quality to it, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. I noticed her hands were trembling as she fastened her seatbelt. She kept looking in the side mirror, then over her shoulder through the back window of the cab. "Where you headed?" I asked, pulling back onto the empty highway. "Just away from here," she said. "As far as you can take me." I nodded, not wanting to pry too much. "I'm Jack," I offered. "Eleanor," she replied after a pause that was just a beat too long. The cab fell silent except for the hum of tires on asphalt. Every few minutes, Eleanor would check the mirrors, her body tense like a coiled spring. I tried to focus on driving, but I couldn't help stealing glances at her. There was something off about the whole situation. "You got family somewhere?" I asked, trying to make normal conversation. "I did once." Her response was flat, emotionless. "Where you coming from tonight?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her words sounded rehearsed. "I was with some friends. We had a disagreement. They left me." Some friends, I thought, leaving a young woman alone on possibly the most isolated stretch of highway in Nevada. The radio, which had been playing soft country music, suddenly erupted in a burst of static. Eleanor jumped in her seat, her hands gripping the dashboard. "Sorry," I said, reaching to adjust the dial. "Reception out here is..." But before I could finish, the static gave way to something else. Garbled voices, speaking too quickly or in some language I couldn't understand. It wasn't Spanish or anything I recognized. The sound made the hair on my arms stand up. I tried changing the station, but every frequency had the same bizarre interference. Then, as suddenly as it started, the radio went completely dead. Not even static, just silence. "Weird," I muttered, trying to hide how unsettled I felt. "Must be the area. They call this the extraterrestrial highway for a reason, I guess." Eleanor didn't smile at my weak joke. Instead, she whispered, "They're looking." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's looking?" "It's not who," she said, her eyes still fixed on the side mirror. "It's what." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My mouth had gone dry. "What are you running from, Eleanor?" She turned to look at me then, really look at me, and in the green glow of the dashboard lights, her face seemed different somehow, older, sadder, like someone who had seen too much. "They found me in 1973, she said quietly. "I was driving home from my waitressing job in Rachel. My car broke down on this road. Then the lights came." 1973? That would make her... I tried to do the math in my head, but it didn't make sense. She couldn't be more than 25 sitting next to me. "What lights?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the rumble of the engine. She opened her mouth to answer, but then her eyes widened, fixed on something above us. "They're here," she whispered. Before I could process what was happening, a brilliant white light flooded the cab. It came from above, so intense it was like daylight had suddenly broken. My instruments went haywire, the speedometer spinning wildly, the fuel gauge fluctuating, the engine temperature rising rapidly. I hit the brakes instinctively, the truck swerving on the empty road. The steering wheel grew hot under my palms, and the engine made a high-pitched whining sound I'd never heard before. I fought to keep control as we skidded to a stop on the shoulder. The light was blinding, coming through every window, making it impossible to see outside. Eleanor was screaming something, but I couldn't hear her over the ringing in my ears. The truck was shaking now, vibrating like it might tear itself apart. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the light vanished. The night returned, darker than before. My heart was hammering in my chest. I blinked, trying to clear the spots from my vision. "Eleanor, are you okay?" No response. When my eyes adjusted, I realized I was alone in the cab. The passenger door was closed, the seatbelt neatly fastened, but Eleanor was gone, vanished, like she'd never been there at all. I threw open my door and jumped out, calling her name. My voice echoed across the empty desert. The air was cold and still, with no sign of disturbance, no footprints in the sandy shoulder, no sound of running feet, nothing. I circled the truck twice, checking underneath, even climbing up to look in the empty trailer. She was just gone. Shaking, I got back into the cab. That's when I noticed something on the passenger seat, a small silver locket, the kind you might keep a family photo in. I picked it up, turning it over in my trembling fingers. It was warm to the touch, like it had been clutched in someone's hand for hours. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a faded black and white photograph of a young girl, maybe 10 years old, with familiar dark hair and a serious expression. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, Eleanor Granger, 1958. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. If the girl in the photo was Eleanor and she was 10 in 1958, I started the truck with shaking hands. The engine turned over normally, all the instruments back to their usual readings. The radio came back on, playing an old Johnny Cash song like nothing had happened. I pulled back onto the highway, driving well over the speed limit. I just wanted to get somewhere with other people, with lights and noise and reality. About 30 miles down the road, I spotted the neon sign of a 24-hour truck stop. I pulled in, parking haphazardly, and practically ran inside. There were a few other drivers there, a couple of locals, normal people doing normal things. I sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and tried to stop my hands from shaking. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun, must have noticed something was wrong. "Rough night on the road?" she asked, filling my cup. "Yeah," I managed. "You could say that. I don't know what made me do it, but I took out the locket and placed it on the counter." "Ever seen this before?" The waitress's expression changed immediately. She set down the coffee pot and picked up the locket, turning it over carefully in her hands. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Someone left it in my truck," I said, not ready to tell the whole story. "A young woman named Eleanor." The waitress closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "Eleanor Granger disappeared on Route 375 in 1973, she said quietly. "Her car was found abandoned about 15 miles east of Rachel. No signs of foul play, no body ever recovered. She was 23 years old." My stomach dropped. "That's not possible. I just gave a ride to a young woman named Eleanor. Tonight?" The waitress didn't look surprised. "You're not the first," she said, sliding the locket back to me. "Drivers have been seeing Eleanor on that stretch of highway for decades. Always the same. Young woman, dark hair, terrified, running from something. She disappears from moving vehicles, leaving this behind." She tapped the locket. "Then the locket itself vanishes within a day or two." I stared at her, my coffee forgotten. "But that's impossible. Welcome to the extraterrestrial highway, honey." She gave me a sad smile. "Some say she was taken by something not from this world. Others think she's caught in some kind of time loop, reliving her last moments over and over. All we know is she's been seen by dozens of drivers over the years, always looking the same age as the night she vanished." I left the truck stop an hour later with the locket in my pocket and a story I still can't believe. I've checked the news archives since then, confirmed that Eleanor Granger really did disappear in 1973. I found her old yearbook photo online. It's the same woman who sat in my truck. The locket is still with me for now, though sometimes I catch it glowing faintly in the dark. I know it'll disappear soon, finding its way back to Eleanor so she can leave it with the next driver who stops for her. I don't know what happened to Eleanor Granger all those years ago, or what keeps bringing her back to that lonely stretch of highway. But I do know I'll never drive Route 375 at night again. And if you ever find yourself on the extraterrestrial highway after dark and see a young woman with long dark hair trying to flag you down, just keep driving, because whatever took Eleanor is still out there, still looking, and I think she's trying to warn us before it's too late. Likely termed Story 16. I still don't know what to make of what happened to me last summer. I've gone back and forth between thinking I was losing my mind or that something not normal was in that house with me. I've never told anyone the full story until now. My parents bought this mini mansion in Bridgewater as an investment property. It was this massive 6-bedroom place with a huge backyard, pool with a slide, and all these fancy security features, including these electronic door locks with passcodes. The previous owners had renovated everything, so it was actually pretty nice inside despite being built in the 70s. They asked me to house sit while they went on a 3-week cruise to celebrate their anniversary. I'd just finished my sophomore year of college and needed a place to crash anyway, so it seemed perfect. A big empty house all to myself? What 20-year-old wouldn't want that? The first couple days were awesome. I invited some friends over to swim, ordered way too much pizza, and basically lived like I owned the place. It was perfect until that first night when things got weird. I remember going to bed around midnight after making sure all the doors were locked and lights were off. I'm actually pretty paranoid about that stuff. Growing up, my dad would lecture us if we left even a single light on overnight. So I'm 100% certain I turned everything off before heading upstairs to the bedroom I'd claimed as mine. At exactly 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. My bedroom door was wide open, which was strange because I distinctly remembered closing it. I sat up in bed and realized there were lights on downstairs. Not just one light either. It looked like every single light in the house was on. I figured I must have been more tired than I thought and forgotten to turn them off. So I got up, went through the entire house turning off lights, and double-checked all the doors. Everything was locked up tight. I went back to bed and chalked it up to being forgetful. The next few days were normal. I had some friends over again, we grilled by the pool, and I was starting to feel comfortable in the house. Then came the night that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I fell asleep on the couch, watching TV. When I woke up, the clock on the cable box said 2:15 a.m. The TV was still on, casting this blue glow across the living room. I was about to get up and head to my bedroom when I noticed movement in the kitchen. There was someone in the house. I froze completely. From where I was lying on the couch, I could see through the doorway into the kitchen. There was a man there. He was completely bald, but that wasn't what made my blood run cold. His head was wrong. It was too large for his body, like someone had photoshopped a bigger head onto a normal frame, and he was smiling this horrible wide grin that never changed as he moved around my kitchen. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I just watched as this person opened drawers, looked inside, closed them, and moved to the next one. He did this methodically for about 10 minutes, never making a sound. Then he suddenly stopped and turned toward me. We made eye contact. His smile never faltered. He just stared at me for what felt like forever, then turned and walked out of the kitchen toward the front door. I heard it open and close. Once I could move again, I grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, a heavy flashlight, and carefully checked the entire house. All the doors were still locked from the inside. The security system showed no entries or exits. I even checked the footage from the doorbell camera my parents had installed. Nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I told myself I must have had a weird waking dream or something. People see strange things when they're half asleep, right? The next night I made sure every door and window was locked before going to bed around 11. I even put a chair under my bedroom doorknob. I was exhausted from not sleeping the night before, so I passed out almost immediately. I woke up around 4 a.m., needing to use the bathroom. When I came back to my room, I heard footsteps downstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking from the front door toward the kitchen. I stood frozen at my bedroom door, listening as they moved around downstairs for several minutes, then started coming up the stairs. I slammed my door shut and shoved the chair back under the knob. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I could see the shadow of feet in the gap under the door. They stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then turned and walked away. I heard them go back downstairs, then silence. I didn't leave my room until morning. When I finally got the courage to go downstairs, I found the front door standing wide open. I know I locked it. I checked it 3 times before going to bed. At this point, I was freaking out. I called my friend Tyler to come over because I didn't want to be alone in the house. While waiting for him, I went through the security system logs. According to the system, the front door hadn't been opened all night, but it was definitely open when I came downstairs. Tyler came over and we checked the entire house together. We found nothing unusual. He thought I was just stressed out and imagining things. Maybe he was right, but after he left that afternoon, I went to grab food at the drive-thru about a mile away. I was gone maybe 20 minutes. I specifically remember locking the door with the app on my phone when I left. When I got back, the front door was wide open again. That night, I armed myself with a steak carving fork from the kitchen. Pathetic, I know, but it was the most weapon-like thing I could find, and checked every closet, behind every shower curtain, under every bed. Nothing. I locked everything up, double-checked it all, and went to bed with the fork next to me. Around 1 in the morning, I jerked awake. Standing in my doorway was the bald man with the too large head. His smile was even wider than before, stretching across his face unnaturally. He just stood there staring at me. I grabbed the carving fork and jumped out of bed, yelling at him to get out. He turned and walked down the hallway. I chased after him, but when I reached the top of the stairs, there was no one there. I ran downstairs, checked every room, every door, every window, all locked. No sign anyone had been there. I was losing my mind. I had to be. There was no other explanation. I called Tyler again, but he didn't answer. I didn't blame him. It was the middle of the night. I turned on all the lights in the house and sat on the couch until morning, jumping at every creak and groan the house made. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, stress, lack of sleep, an overactive imagination, whatever. I went about my day trying to act normal. I even went swimming in the afternoon to try to relax. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I saw him again. Not at night, not when I was half asleep, but in broad daylight. He was standing in the living room just watching me with that same frozen smile. I dropped the knife I was holding and it clattered on the floor. When I looked up again, he was gone. This wasn't a dream or my imagination. I saw him, clear as day. I ran outside and sat by the pool until it got dark, not wanting to be inside the house. But eventually, I had to go back in. That night was the worst. I heard him walking around the house constantly. I'd see him at the end of hallways, but when I'd turn on lights or move toward him, he'd be gone. Once I saw him standing at the foot of my bed, just staring. I screamed and threw a book at him, but it passed through him and hit the wall. By morning, I was a complete wreck. I hadn't slept. I was seeing things, hearing things. I packed a bag and drove to a hotel about 20 minutes away. I needed to get out of that house. I stayed at the hotel for 2 nights, trying to convince myself I'd just been sleep-deprived and stressed. Maybe the house had mold or carbon monoxide or something that was making me hallucinate. I almost believed it until I woke up on the second night at the hotel and saw him standing by the window of my hotel room, that same unnatural smile on his face. I checked out immediately and drove to my friend's apartment. I slept on his couch for the remaining week until my parents came back. I never told them what happened. What would I even say? Hey, your new house is haunted by a bald guy with a big head who smiles too much. They ended up selling the house 6 months later because my mom said it never felt right to her. I wonder if she experienced anything there too, but just never mentioned it. I still don't know what I saw in that house. Was it a ghost? A hallucination? Something else entirely? All I know is that I've never felt such pure, primal fear as I did when I locked eyes with that smiling man in the middle of the night. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear footsteps outside my door. Story 17. It was summer 2 years ago. I was 16 at the time and bored as hell like every other teenager stuck in our tiny town of Fox Hollow during break. There's literally nothing to do here except hang out at the gas station or wander around. My buddy Ben and I had been friends since elementary school, and we'd gotten into this habit of just driving around the back roads, blasting music and exploring. Ben had just gotten his license and his dad's old pickup truck, which gave us this new freedom to just go wherever. That day was crazy hot, like 95 degrees, and we'd been driving for maybe an hour with no real destination, just two dumb kids with nothing better to do. We were probably about 15 miles outside town when we spotted this faded green road sign that said Raven Hill Cemetery Road. I remember Ben slowing down and looking at me with this grin. "Wanna check it out?" he asked. I shrugged. Why not? We'd never heard of this cemetery before, and it seemed like something different at least. The road wasn't even paved, just this narrow gravel path that wound through these really dense trees. It was the middle of the afternoon, but felt darker because of how thick the forest was. After about half a mile, we came to this small clearing with an actual cemetery, just a tiny family plot with maybe 20 headstones inside this rusty iron fence. The dates on the stones were old, like 1800s old, but that's not the weird part. Past the cemetery, the dirt road continued into the woods, and there was this chain-link rope stretched across it with a no trespassing sign hanging from it. The sign was all weathered and shot up with what looked like bullet holes. "Let's go see what's back there," Ben said, already getting out of the truck. I had this feeling in my gut that we should just turn around, but I didn't want to seem like a wimp. So we ducked under the rope and started walking down the path. That's when things started getting strange. The further we walked, the quieter everything got, like unnaturally quiet. The wind completely stopped. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, nothing. Just dead silence. The trees grew thicker too, their branches creating this canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. It felt like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in just a few minutes. After walking maybe a quarter mile, I started noticing tires, not just one or two, but dozens of them scattered through the trees. Old car tires, truck tires, tractor tires, just lying everywhere, half buried in the dirt and leaves. Some were stacked in piles, others hung from tree branches with rope. "What the hell is this place?" I remember asking. My voice sounded too loud in the silence. Ben just shook his head, but I could tell he was getting freaked out too. We kept walking, and there were more and more tires, hundreds of them. It was like someone had been dumping them here for years. Some looked ancient, all cracked and covered in moss. Others looked newer. That's when we saw it, this baby doll hanging from a tree branch by a rope around its neck. Not like a toy someone left, but deliberately placed there. The doll was old and dirty, with one eye missing and most of its hair gone. It was swinging slightly even though there wasn't any wind. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We should have turned back right then, but for some stupid reason we kept going a little further. That's when we found the dog. It was under the tree with the doll, just lying there. A medium-sized dog, like a beagle or something. Its stomach had been cut open, and its insides were pulled out and arranged in some kind of pattern around it. There were flies everywhere. The blood looked fresh, like it had happened that day. I think I actually gagged. Ben grabbed my arm and said, "We need to leave, now." We practically ran back to the truck. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced someone was watching us from the trees. The whole way back, we didn't say a word. When we finally got to Ben's house, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. "Maybe it's just some teenagers messing around," Ben suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. "With a dead dog, that's way beyond messing around," I said. We debated whether to tell someone, our parents, the police, anyone. But what would we say? That we trespassed on private property and found some weird tire dump and a dead animal? We'd just get in trouble. So we decided to keep it to ourselves. For weeks after, I had nightmares about that place, about the doll's blank stare and the dog's bloody insides. I'd wake up sweating, convinced someone was standing in the corner of my room. I stopped sleeping with the lights off. Ben and I didn't talk about going back, not at first. But after about a month, the whole thing started to seem less scary and more like this challenge we hadn't met. Like maybe we'd just freaked ourselves out over nothing. Maybe there was a logical explanation for everything we'd seen. "We should go back," Ben said one day while we were playing video games in his basement. In the daytime, just to prove there's nothing to be afraid of. I didn't want to. Every instinct was screaming at me not to return to that place. But I also didn't want Ben thinking I was scared. 16-year-old logic, right? So the next Saturday, we drove back out to Ravenhill Cemetery Road. It was another hot day, but overcast this time, with these heavy grey clouds that made everything look washed out. As we turned onto the gravel road, I felt sick to my stomach. We parked in the same spot by the family cemetery. Everything looked exactly the same. The rusty fence, the old headstones, the chain across the path with the no trespassing sign. But something felt different. The air felt heavier, like right before a thunderstorm. We got out of the truck and stood there for a minute, working up the courage to go under the chain again. That's when we saw the dog. Not the dead one from before. A different dog. It was sitting in the middle of the path, maybe 50 feet beyond the chain. The biggest, most muscular dog I've ever seen, like a cane corso mixed with a pit bull. It was just sitting there, perfectly still, staring at us with these bright orange eyes, not normal dog eyes at all. Next to it was a metal dog bowl, completely empty. The dog wasn't barking or growling, just sitting there, watching us. But somehow that was worse. It felt deliberate, like it was guarding the path. "Maybe it belongs to whoever owns this land," Ben whispered. I nodded, but I knew that wasn't right. This wasn't a normal dog. The way it was staring at us, so focused, so still, made the hair on my arms stand up. "Let's try going around," Ben suggested, "through the trees." I didn't think that was a good idea, but I followed him anyway as he started picking his way through the underbrush to the right of the path, giving the dog a wide berth. We'd gone maybe 15 feet into the trees when Ben's phone suddenly started blasting music at full volume. Both of us nearly jumped out of our skin. It was Walk by Pantera, RESPECTWALK, The lyrics were practically screaming at us. Ben fumbled with his phone, his face pale. "This isn't even on my playlist," he said, trying to turn it off. "I don't even have this song downloaded." I looked back toward the path and the dog had stood up. It was still staring at us, but now its posture was rigid, alert, those orange eyes locked directly on mine. It didn't make a sound, but the message was clear: leave, now. A wave of pure fear washed over me. This wasn't just some weird coincidence or some junkyard with a guard dog. This was something else entirely. Something was telling us, warning us to stay away. "We need to go," I said, my voice shaking. "Right now." For once, Ben didn't argue. We backtracked to the truck as fast as we could, constantly looking over our shoulders. The dog never moved from its spot, never made a sound. It just watched us go. As we drove away, I kept expecting something to come running after us or jump in front of the truck. Nothing did, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd narrowly escaped something terrible. We never went back to the tire cemetery, never even drove down that road again. Sometimes Ben and I would talk about it, trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. Was it just some illegal dumping ground with a guard dog? Was someone living back there, or was it something supernatural? I don't know, but I do know that some places feel wrong, like they're not meant for people to visit. That baby doll hanging by its neck, the mutilated dog, the hundreds of tires scattered through the silent forest, and that guardian with the orange eyes that seemed to look right through me. I'm 18 now and about to leave for college. Sometimes I think about driving out there one last time, just to see if it was all as scary as I remember. But then I think about those orange eyes and that music playing out of nowhere, and I realize some warnings you should just accept, some places you should just stay away from. I still have nightmares about the tire cemetery. In them, I'm always walking deeper and deeper into those woods, past more and more tires, following some sound I can't quite identify. And I always wake up just as I reach a clearing where hundreds of those orange-eyed dogs are waiting, sitting in a perfect circle around something I can never quite see. I don't know what's back there in those woods, but whatever it is, it wants to be left alone, and I'm going to respect that. Story 18. I'm still not sure if I should even be typing this out, but it's been almost 10 years, and I still can't shake what happened that night. I've tried explaining it to people, but they always just think I was dreaming or hallucinating or something. I wasn't. I know what I saw was real. It was August 2014, and I had just been kicked out of my rehab program. Rock bottom doesn't even begin to describe how I felt. I had been struggling with addiction for years. Started with pills after a car accident when I was 19, and things spiraled from there. My parents had spent so much money getting me into this fancy recovery center, and I couldn't even make it through the first month. The day I got kicked out was horrible. I had gotten into a huge argument with one of the counselors about some stupid rule, and next thing I knew, I was being told to pack my things. I remember sitting on the curb outside the facility with my duffel bag, crying and feeling like the biggest failure on the planet. I had nowhere to go except back to my parents' house, which was the last place I wanted to be. Not because my parents were bad people. They weren't. They were actually amazing, which made disappointing them again so much worse. My dad picked me up without saying much. The entire hour-long drive home was mostly silent, except for a few awkward attempts at conversation. I could feel the disappointment radiating off him, which just made me feel even more worthless. When we got home, my mom hugged me and tried to act like everything was fine, but I could see the hurt and worry in her eyes. That night, I went to my childhood bedroom early, around 8 o'clock. I couldn't bear to sit at the dinner table and make small talk while we all pretended I hadn't just wasted thousands of their dollars and failed yet again. My old room felt both comforting and strange. Nothing had changed since high school, but I wasn't the same person who had lived there before. I took a shower, put on an old t-shirt and shorts, and crawled into bed. I remember lying there for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had gone so wrong. I was 26, living with my parents again, with no job, no money, and a habit that I couldn't seem to kick no matter how hard I tried. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because I started having this weird dream. In the dream, I was sitting in this place called Color Me Mine. It's one of those pottery painting shops, but in my dream it was also a coffee shop, which doesn't make any sense. I was sitting at a table by myself, drinking coffee and painting a mug. There weren't many people there, just a few other customers scattered around. Then this middle-aged woman with short gray hair came up to my table. She sat down across from me without asking and just stared at me with these intense eyes. The creepy thing was, she knew my name. "Sarah," she said, "you know you're not going to get better if you keep going back to the same patterns." I remember feeling confused about how she knew who I was and what I was going through. I hadn't told her anything. "You have two paths in front of you," she continued. "One leads to more of the same, pain, addiction, disappointment. The other is harder initially, but leads to freedom." I opened my mouth to ask her how she knew all this when suddenly the entire dream was shattered by the most horrific sound I've ever heard. It was a scream, not like a normal human scream, but something deep and primal and filled with pure rage. It was so loud that it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. The scream continued as I jerked awake. That's how I know it wasn't just a dream. The scream carried over from the dream world into reality. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart racing, sweat pouring down my back. The scream was still going, but it was fading now, like whatever was making it was moving away from me. As the scream faded, I became aware of something else. There was a presence in my room. I could feel it before I could see it. This cold, heavy energy that made it hard to breathe. My bedroom was dark except for the faint glow of a streetlight coming through my window blinds, casting weird shadows on the wall. I looked to the left side of my bed, and that's when I saw it. Standing there, maybe 3 feet from my bed, was what looked like an old woman, but not a normal old woman. This thing was wrong. Her skin was a sickly grayish color. Her face was gaunt with sunken cheeks, and her eyes, God, her eyes were just black voids filled with so much hatred. Her mouth was open in this terrible snarl, showing teeth that seemed too long and sharp for a human mouth. I couldn't move. I literally could not make my body respond. I just sat there, propped up on my elbows, staring at this entity that was staring right back at me. The look on her face was pure hatred. I've never had anyone look at me with such intense loathing before or since. It was like she wanted to destroy me completely, erase me from existence. The room felt ice cold, and I could see my breath coming out in little puffs. Even though it was August in a house with no air conditioning, time seemed to stretch out forever as we stared at each other. I don't know if it was seconds or minutes that passed. Finally, something in me broke through the paralysis. I was raised religious, though I hadn't been to church in years. But in that moment, the only thing I could think to do was pray. I started whispering, "Our Father who art in heaven," over and over. My voice was shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. As I prayed, the entity's expression changed from hatred to something like frustration. She started to fade, not all at once, but gradually, like a TV picture losing signal. First I could see through her slightly, then more and more until she was just a faint outline and then nothing at all. When she was gone, I sat there for what must have been an hour, afraid to move, afraid to lie back down, afraid to even blink in case she came back. Every noise in the house made me jump. The refrigerator kicking on, the house settling, the neighbor's dog barking outside. I kept the light on for the rest of the night and didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, I went to the kitchen where my mom was making breakfast. I must have looked terrible because she immediately asked if I was okay. I broke down and told her everything, the dream, the scream, the entity by my bed. I described every detail, desperate for her to believe me. She listened patiently, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. "Honey," she said gently, "you were probably just having a nightmare. With everything that's happened, it's no wonder you're having bad dreams." "Mom, I wasn't dreaming," I insisted. "I was awake. I saw it with my own eyes." She just patted my hand and said something about stress and how the mind can play tricks on us. I gave up trying to convince her. How could I explain something that sounded so crazy, even to myself? The thing is, I know what I saw. I wasn't high. I'd been clean in rehab for 3 weeks. I wasn't dreaming. The transition from dream to waking was clear and distinct, and I wasn't hallucinating from withdrawal. I'd already gone through the worst of that in the first week of rehab. That day, I couldn't shake the feeling that the entity was somehow connected to my addiction, like it was feeding off my misery and self-destruction, and it was angry that I was trying to get better. The pure hatred in its eyes, it was like it wanted me to fail, wanted me to give up and just suffer. After that night, something changed in me. It sounds weird, but that terrifying experience became a turning point. If something that evil wanted me to fail so badly, then maybe fighting back was the right thing to do. Maybe getting better would be the ultimate act of defiance against whatever that thing was. I found a new outpatient program the following week. It wasn't fancy like the rehab I'd been kicked out of, just a simple community program with group therapy 3 times a week. I started going to NA meetings every day. I got a job at a local grocery store. Nothing glamorous, but it was a start. Recovery wasn't a straight line. I had setbacks. There were days when I came so close to using again that I could almost taste it. But every time I felt like giving up, I would remember that entity and the hatred in its eyes, and somehow that gave me the strength to keep going. I never saw the entity again, though sometimes I still wake up with the feeling that I'm being watched. Sometimes my room will get inexplicably cold for a few minutes, then return to normal. Little things that make me wonder if it's still there, lurking just beyond what I can see. It's been almost 10 years now. I've been clean for 9 years and 4 months. I have my own apartment, a good job as a counselor at a youth center, and even a cat named Milo who probably saved my life as much as any therapy did. I'm not religious in any traditional sense, but that experience left me convinced that there are things in this world, or maybe outside of it, that we don't understand. I still don't know what that entity was, a demon, a ghost, some manifestation of my own self-hatred. I don't have answers. All I know is what I saw, what I felt, and how it changed me. Sometimes I think about that dream before the entity appeared, the woman in Color Me Mine telling me I had two paths in front of me. Maybe she was trying to warn me or help me. Maybe the entity was trying to make sure I chose the path of destruction. All I know is that I chose the harder path, and it led to freedom, just like Dream Woman said it would. And sometimes I wonder if that evil entity is still out there, furious that it lost whatever game it was playing with my soul. Story 19. I've never told anyone this story outside of my immediate family because honestly, who would believe me? But this happened to me in 1998, and I still think about it at least once a week. I was 19 at the time, living with my parents in Ridgemont, this supernormal middle-class suburb on Long Island. Nothing exciting ever happened there. The houses all looked the same. People mowed their lawns on weekends, and teenagers like me complained about how boring it was. You know, typical suburban life. That fall, I was taking classes at the community college and working part-time at a video store. One Friday night in late October, I went over to my buddy Mike's house to play video games. His parents were away for the weekend, so we had the place to ourselves. We were playing GoldenEye on his N64 and drinking some beers he'd gotten his older brother to buy. Nothing crazy, just hanging out. I remember checking my watch around midnight and thinking I should probably head home soon. My parents weren't super strict, but they'd still worry if I stayed out too late without calling. But then Mike suggested just one more game, which turned into several more. I ended up falling asleep on his couch sometime around 2 in the morning. I woke up suddenly at around 3 a.m. The TV was still on, showing the blue screen of the paused game, and Mike had gone upstairs to his bedroom. I had this moment of panic when I realized how late it was. My house was only about a 15-minute walk from Mike's, and I'd walked it hundreds of times. I figured I'd just quietly slip in through the back door at home and apologize to my parents in the morning. I didn't bother waking Mike. I just grabbed my jacket, put on my sneakers, and headed out. It was a typical fall night, windy but not really cold yet. The kind of night where you can still get away with just a light jacket. The streetlights in our neighborhood were spaced pretty far apart, creating these pools of orange light with dark spots in between. I'd never really noticed how creepy that could be until that night. The streets were completely empty, not even a single car, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional creak of someone's porch swing. I remember walking quickly, hands in my pockets, just wanting to get home. There was nothing specifically scary happening, but something about being the only person awake in the whole neighborhood gave me this weird, exposed feeling. I was about 2 blocks from my house at the intersection of Maple and Birch Street. I still remember the exact spot when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Under a streetlight about half a block ahead, I could see a figure emerging into the pool of light. At first, I just registered that someone else was out walking at this weird hour, but as the figure came fully into view under the streetlight, I felt this cold wave of dread wash over me. The person, if you could call it that, was wearing what looked like all white clothing. But it wasn't just the clothing that was weird. The figure itself was glowing slightly, like it was reflecting more light than should have been possible under that dim street lamp. And then I realized what was really wrong. This thing was impossibly tall. I'm not talking basketball player tall. I'm talking about a figure that had to be at least twice the height of a normal person. Its proportions were roughly human. Head, arms, legs, but everything was stretched to this nightmarish scale. I couldn't make out any facial features from that distance, just this towering white silhouette standing perfectly still under the streetlight. I froze. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It felt like one of those dreams where you try to run but your legs won't move. I remember thinking, this can't be real. I'm still asleep on Mike's couch. But then the figure took a step forward, and that broke my paralysis. Pure instinct took over. Instead of continuing straight ahead toward my house and toward whatever that thing was, I cut diagonally across the intersection and made a quick right turn onto Elm Street. Then I ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life. I didn't look back until I'd gone at least half a block. When I did, I could see the figure had reached the stop sign at the corner, and that's when the true scale of this thing hit me. Its head reached the middle of the stop sign, not the bottom edge where the sign meets the pole, the middle of the actual octagonal sign itself. I felt sick. My legs went wobbly for a second, but the adrenaline kept me moving. I sprinted the rest of the way home, not caring about how much noise I made. I burst through our back door, locked it behind me, then ran through the house, locking every door and window I could find. My mom came downstairs, obviously freaked out by the commotion. I must have looked completely terrified because her anger at me coming home so late immediately turned to concern. I was hyperventilating, sweating, and probably white as a sheet. I told her what I'd seen. She thought I was drunk or that someone had slipped something into my drink. Dad came down too, and they both tried to calm me down. They didn't believe me, obviously. Who would? But they could see I was genuinely terrified, not making it up. I barely slept that night. I kept going to the windows, checking the street, half expecting to see that glowing white giant looking in at me. Morning came, and in the daylight, everything felt almost normal again. Almost. Except I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. After breakfast, when my parents were distracted with weekend chores, I grabbed a tape measure from my dad's toolbox and walked back to that intersection. I needed to know if my mind had been playing tricks on me, exaggerating the height in my panicked state. I went straight to the stop sign. I measured from the ground to the middle of the sign. 10.5 feet. 10.5 freaking feet. No human could be that tall, not even close. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the stop sign, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it had been on stilts, but it moved too smoothly for that. Maybe it was some kind of projection, but that made no sense. It was the 90s in suburban Long Island, not some high-tech lab. Maybe it was wearing some kind of costume with an extension for the head. But why would someone do that at 3 a.m. in a residential neighborhood? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. But I knew what I saw. I saw something that looked human but stood over 10 feet tall, glowing white in the night, walking through my neighborhood like it had every right to be there. For weeks afterward, I refused to be out after dark. I made excuses to my friends, told them I was grounded or had too much homework. I started sleeping with my desk chair propped under my doorknob. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced I could see a white glow coming through my curtains. My parents were worried. They suggested I talk to someone, meaning a therapist, but I refused. What was I going to say? I saw a giant glowing man walking down my street in the middle of the night. They'd think I was having some kind of psychotic break. Eventually, the acute fear faded. I started going out at night again, hanging out with my friends, but I never walked home alone after dark again. Not in that neighborhood. I always made sure someone could drive me or I'd stay over. It's been over 20 years now, and I still don't have an explanation for what I saw that night. I've gone down some pretty deep rabbit holes online looking for similar encounters. I've read about shadow people and various cryptids, but nothing quite matches what I experienced. The thing that still bothers me the most isn't just what I saw, it's the questions that come with it. Why would something like that be walking through a suburban neighborhood at 3 in the morning? Where was it going? What did it want? Was it aware that a terrified teenager was watching it? Did it care? And the question that really keeps me up at night sometimes. What if I hadn't run? What if I had kept walking straight ahead? Would I have passed right by this thing? Would it have noticed me? Would it have done something? I moved away from Long Island years ago. I live in Boston now, in an apartment building with good security and lots of neighbors. But sometimes when I'm walking home late and pass under a streetlight, I'll find myself looking ahead, scanning for any unusually tall figures in the distance, and I'll walk a little faster, just in case. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. Hell, there are days when I almost convince myself it was just some weird hallucination or dream, but then I remember the tape measure, 10.5 feet, and I know what I saw was real, even if I'll never understand what it was or why it was there. Whatever that thing was, it didn't belong in our world. It was something that shouldn't exist in a rational universe. And yet, on that ordinary fall night in 1998, in an unremarkable suburb on Long Island, it was there. Walking the same streets I walked every day, like it was the most normal thing in the world, and that's what scares me the most. Story 20. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened to my family. We came to America in the late 80s after escaping Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge. My parents, 5 siblings, grandmother, 2 aunts, and my uncle Vyazna all crammed into this old pre-World War II house in the Midwest. We were just grateful to have a roof over our heads after years in refugee camps, but we had no idea what was waiting for us in that house. The first time I saw the bomb shelter, I felt uneasy. It was in the basement, this concrete room with thick walls and a heavy metal door. The previous owners told us it was built during the Cold War scare. The room next to it was supposed to be a bedroom, but nobody wanted to sleep there. Even during summer, that room was ice cold, and everyone who walked in felt like they were being watched. My grandmother kept saying in Khmer, "Something bad happened here. This place has memories." But we just thought she was being superstitious. We were trying to adapt to American life, and ghost stories seemed like the least of our worries. After about 2 weeks of nobody claiming the bedroom next to the bomb shelter, my uncle Vesna decided he'd take it. He was 19, rebellious, and thought we were all being ridiculous. "I'll show you there's nothing to be afraid of," he said, dragging his mattress down there. My parents warned him, but he just laughed. 3 nights later, Vesna came upstairs for breakfast looking exhausted. When my mom asked if he slept well, he hesitated before admitting, "The door to the bomb shelter keeps opening at night." We all stopped eating and stared at him. He quickly added, "It's probably just bad hinges or something. The latch is old." That night, he pushed his heavy wooden dresser in front of the bomb shelter door. "That'll keep it shut," he told us confidently. I remember waking up around 3 in the morning to what sounded like knocking, not like someone at the front door. This was different. It was rhythmic. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. I pulled my blanket over my head and tried to convince myself it was the pipes or the house settling. At breakfast, Vyazna looked worse than before. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee. "Did anyone else hear that knocking last night?" he asked. We all nodded. "It came from behind the bomb shelter door," my sister whispered, "even with the dresser there." Over the next week, the knocking got louder and more persistent, and we all started waking up at exactly 3 a.m. every night. Not around 3, exactly at 3. I'd look at my alarm clock and the red digits would always show 3 o'clock when the knocking began. My grandmother started burning incense and mumbling prayers. She had grown up near a Buddhist monastery in Cambodia and always seemed to sense things the rest of us couldn't. When my parents asked what she was doing, she just shook her head and said, "We are not alone in this house." The night everything escalated, I'll never forget. It was about a month after we moved in. The knocking was so loud it sounded like someone was trying to break down the door from inside the bomb shelter. We all gathered in Viana's room, huddled together in the corner farthest from the bomb shelter door. The dresser Viana had pushed against it was shaking slightly with each knock. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, then suddenly 5 rapid knocks that made us all jump. "What do you want?" Vyazna shouted in English, his voice cracking. The knocking stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. We all stayed in the living room for the rest of the night, nobody daring to go back to sleep. As the sun came up, my grandmother finally spoke. "There is a woman," she said quietly in Khmer. "She was killed by her husband." We all turned to her, waiting for more. She explained that while we were sleeping, she had communicated with the spirit through meditation. According to my grandmother, the woman had been having an affair in the mid-1940s. When her husband discovered her infidelity, he murdered her in a rage. He dismembered her body and hid the pieces behind the wall in the bomb shelter. "She is angry," my grandmother said. "Not just at him, but at being trapped." The door is her only way to move freely. My parents exchanged skeptical glances, but none of us had a better explanation for what was happening. Vyazna scoffed, "So what am I supposed to do? Just let this ghost open my door whenever she wants?" My grandmother nodded solemnly. "Leave the door unlocked, let her wander. She means no harm if you respect her space." Vyazna reluctantly agreed. That night he removed the dresser and made sure the bomb shelter door was unlocked. We all braced ourselves for what might happen, but there was no knocking. Instead, around 3 a.m., we heard the distinct creak of the door opening, then closing about 20 minutes later. This continued for several weeks. Sometimes we'd feel cold spots in the hallway or kitchen, but nothing threatening happened. I thought we'd reached some kind of understanding with whatever was in our house. But Vyazna grew increasingly frustrated with his disrupted sleep. "I'm tired of this bullshit," he announced one evening. "I'm sealing that door shut tonight." My grandmother begged him not to, but he wouldn't listen. He installed 3 heavy-duty bolts on the bomb shelter door and sealed the edges with some kind of industrial tape he'd bought. "Let's see her get through that," he said, looking proud of himself. That night, I woke to screaming. Not knocking, actual screaming. I ran downstairs to find Vyazna in the hallway outside his room, pale and shaking. "Something attacked me," he gasped. According to Vyazna, he'd been sleeping when a powerful gust of wind somehow formed inside his sealed room. It was so strong it knocked pictures off his walls. Then, a small piece of metal, later identified as a bolt from the bomb shelter door, flew across the room and sliced his cheek open. He had a thin cut about 2 inches long that was bleeding slightly. My grandmother wasn't surprised. "You challenged her," she said simply. "You disrespected her space again." The next day, my parents contacted a local Buddhist temple. 2 monks came to our house and performed a cleansing ritual. They burned special incense, chanted prayers, and sprinkled blessed water throughout the house, paying special attention to the bomb shelter. One of the monks, an older man with kind eyes, told us the spirit was indeed a woman who had died violently. He confirmed much of what my grandmother had sensed. "Her name was Eleanor," the monk said. "She's been trapped here for decades." After the cleansing, things calmed down. The knocking stopped, and the bomb shelter door remained closed. Vyazna still complained about cold spots in his room, but there were no more flying objects or wind gusts. We started to relax and focus on adjusting to our new American life. Fast forward 7 years. Vyazna had married and moved into a small house about 20 minutes from us with his wife and their 3-year-old daughter, Bofa. One Sunday, when we were all gathered for a family dinner at his place, Bofa kept going to the hallway closet, opening the door slightly and placing small cups of water on the floor in front of it. When Vyazna asked what she was doing, Bofa replied matter-of-factly, "It's for the scary lady with the red eyes. She's thirsty." The room went silent. My grandmother exchanged a look with my mother. "What scary lady, sweetie?" Vyazna asked, his voice tight. "The one who follows you, Daddy," Bofa said, pointing at the closet door. "She stands behind you a lot. She's angry because you locked her door." Vyazna called the temple that same night. This time, they suggested bringing in more experienced monks who specialized in dealing with vengeful spirits. 3 monks from California, Texas, and Florida flew in over the next week. They performed elaborate rituals in both our old house, where new owners had already reported strange occurrences, and Vyazna's new home. The Florida monk burned special herbs and chanted for hours. The California monk created protective amulets for each family member. But it was the Texas monk who finally addressed the spirit directly. I was there when he stood in Vyazna's living room, eyes closed, speaking to what seemed like empty air. "Eleanor," he said firmly, "your pain is acknowledged. Your death was unjust, but this family is not responsible for what happened to you." The temperature in the room dropped so quickly we could see our breath. The monk continued, "You must find peace elsewhere. Your remains were never properly laid to rest, but your spirit can still find release." What happened next still haunts me. All the lights in the house flickered violently. A framed family photo crashed to the floor, its glass shattering. And then, most terrifying of all, we heard a woman's voice, distant but clear, say, "He locked me in again." The Texas monk opened a small vial of oil, drew symbols on all the doorways, and began a final chant. The air felt electrified, and I swear I could see a shadowy figure in the hallway for just a moment, the silhouette of a woman with long hair. After nearly 5 hours of rituals, the monk finally exhaled deeply and said, "She's gone. I've guided her to cross over." He explained that Eleanor's spirit had attached itself to Vyazna because his act of sealing the bomb shelter door had mirrored her original trauma of being locked away. She had followed him to his new home, growing increasingly angry and potentially dangerous, especially to Bofa, who could see her clearly. It's been 15 years since that final cleansing. Vesna's daughter is now in college and doesn't remember any of it. We've all moved to different cities, built our lives, tried to forget. But sometimes when I wake up at exactly 3 a.m. for no reason, I still feel a chill run down my spine. And I wonder if Eleanor really found peace, or if she's still out there, looking for someone who will finally set her free. Story 21. I still get chills whenever I think about what happened last August. It's been 8 months, and I've barely slept through the night since. I've tried therapy, meditation, even medication. Nothing helps. I need to write this down. Maybe putting it into words will help me process it. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not losing my mind. My boyfriend Jake and I had been planning this hiking trip to Colorado for months. We're both originally from Ohio, and after a particularly brutal winter and stressful year at work, we were desperate for some mountain air and adventure. We decided to drive instead of fly so we could take our time, see some sights along the way, and bring all our camping gear without hassle. We left Cincinnati around noon on a Friday, planning to drive for about 10 hours before stopping at a hotel in Kansas. Jake did the first shift while I navigated and controlled the music. The trip started perfectly normal. We sang along to our favorite songs, stopped at a cute diner for lunch, and even pulled over at a few roadside attractions to stretch our legs. Around 9 that night, Jake was getting tired, so I took over driving. He fell asleep almost immediately, head against the window, while I continued west on I-70. That's when things started getting weird. I remember looking at the GPS and seeing we were supposed to stay on I-70 for another 100 miles or so, but after about an hour of driving, I noticed the highway signs were becoming less frequent. The traffic had thinned out completely too. No cars ahead or behind us. I figured it was just because it was getting late, but something felt off. Then the GPS started glitching. The screen would freeze, then jump ahead, showing us in completely different locations. I tried restarting it, but it kept malfunctioning. Eventually, it just displayed recalculating over and over before going completely blank. I wasn't too worried yet. I figured we just needed to keep heading west, and I'd see signs for the next major city eventually, but the signs never came. The highway narrowed from 3 lanes to 2, then to what felt like barely more than a country road. The pavement was cracked with weeds growing through in places. There were no mile markers, no exits, no lights, just darkness and empty fields on either side of us. I checked my phone to use the map app instead, but there was no signal. After driving like this for what felt like hours, I started to panic a little. Our gas was getting low and I had no idea where we were. I was about to wake Jake when I spotted a dim light in the distance. As I got closer, I could make out an old gas station, the kind with just 2 pumps and a small convenience store. The sign was partially burnt out, but I could read "Last Stop Gas" in flickering red neon. I pulled in, relief washing over me. The digital clock on the dashboard read 11:45 p.m. I nudged Jake awake. "Hey, I need to get gas and I think we're lost. The GPS died and I haven't seen a highway sign in ages." Jake rubbed his eyes, looking confused as he took in our surroundings. "Where the hell are we? This doesn't look like I-70." "I don't know. I'm going to ask inside. The gas station looked like something from the 1980s. Not vintage charming, but genuinely old and neglected. The fluorescent lights inside flickered, and there was a strange smell in the air, like something burning mixed with the scent of rot. I walked inside, the bell above the door letting out a weak jingle. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with the most unsettling eyes I've ever seen. They were pale blue, almost white, and seemed too large for his gaunt face. His skin was paper-thin with blue veins visible beneath. When he looked at me, I felt like he was staring right through me. Hi, I said, trying to sound normal. Could you tell me where we are exactly? I think we got off track somehow. The man didn't respond immediately, just kept staring. Then, in a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in years, he said, "Highway 13, not many come this way anymore." "Highway 13? That's not right. We were on I-70 heading west," he shrugged. "Maps change, roads disappear." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Okay. Well, is there a way to get back to I-70 from here?" The man leaned forward, his eyes widening even more. "This road, after midnight, bad things happen. You should leave now, go back the way you came." My heart started racing. "What do you mean, bad things?" Instead of answering, he glanced at an old clock on the wall. It read 11:52. "Fill your tank and go. East, not west." Then he turned away, as if the conversation was over. I hurried back outside, thoroughly creeped out. Jake was pumping gas, looking worried. "Did you figure out where we are?" he asked. "Someplace called Highway 13. The guy inside was super weird, said we need to go back east, not west, and that bad things happen on this road after midnight." Jake laughed, but it sounded forced. "Great. A cryptic warning from a gas station attendant in the middle of nowhere. That's not straight out of a horror movie or anything." I tried to laugh too, but couldn't. "Let's just fill up and figure out where we are. Maybe we can find a motel nearby and start fresh in the morning." As Jake finished with the gas, I noticed how unnaturally quiet it was. No crickets, no distant traffic, no wind, just complete silence. I went back inside to pay, trying not to look at the creepy attendant more than necessary. When I handed him the cash, his ice-cold fingers brushed against mine, and I had to suppress a shudder. "Remember," he whispered as I turned to leave, "bad things after midnight." I practically ran back to the car. It was 11:58 according to our dashboard clock. "Let's go," I said to Jake, my voice higher than normal. "I really don't like this place." Jake nodded, looking unsettled himself now. He took over driving, and we pulled back onto the dark highway. We decided to continue west, since that was our original direction, and east would just take us back to where we'd already been. I tried to rationalize that the old man was probably just messing with us, some bored gas station attendant having fun scaring city folks passing through. As the clock ticked over to midnight, a strange fog began rolling in from the surrounding trees. It wasn't the normal kind of fog that forms low to the ground. This seemed to pour from the forest like smoke, thick and almost purposeful in the way it moved. Jake slowed the car as visibility dropped rapidly. "This is insane," he muttered, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. I can barely see 10 feet ahead. The road beneath us seemed to deteriorate with each mile, becoming more cracked and uneven. Our car bumped and rattled over potholes. The fog grew so dense that it was like driving through a cloud, the beams from our headlights reflecting back at us instead of cutting through. Then the headlights started to flicker, on, off, on, off. What the hell? Jake hit the dashboard with his palm, as if that might fix it. Suddenly the engine sputtered and died. We rolled to a stop in the middle of the road, surrounded by impenetrable white fog. Jake tried the ignition again and again, but nothing happened. Not even the clicking sound of a dead battery, just silence. "Try your phone again," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. I pulled it out, but there was still no signal. The clock on the dashboard read 12:10 a.m. "What do we do now?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "I'll check under the hood, but I don't know what." Jake stopped mid-sentence, his eyes fixed on something outside my window. I turned to look, but couldn't see anything through the fog. "What is it?" I whispered. "I thought I saw movement in the fog." His voice was barely audible. We sat in tense silence, straining to see or hear anything. That's when the car radio suddenly turned on by itself, loud static filling the car and making us both jump. The static crackled and popped, then faded into what sounded like a whisper. "Turn around." I looked at Jake, my blood running cold. "Did you hear that?" He nodded slowly, his face pale. "The radio wasn't even on." The voice came again, slightly louder this time. "Turn around, turn around." Jake reached for the radio knob and tried to turn it off, but it stayed on, the voice becoming more insistent with each repetition. "Turn around, turn around." That's when I saw it, a tall, shadowy figure emerging from the fog on my side of the car. It moved with an unnatural smoothness, gliding rather than walking. As it came closer, I could make out a hooded shape, but where a face should have been, there was only darkness. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. The figure approached my window and slowly raised what looked like a hand, impossibly long, thin fingers extending toward the glass. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was deafening in the silence. Jake grabbed my arm, squeezing so tight it hurt. "Maya," he whispered, "don't look at it." But I couldn't look away. The figure tilted what should have been its head, as if curious. Then it pressed its face, or where its face should be, against my window. The glass began to frost over from the cold emanating from this thing, ice crystals spreading across the window like spider webs. The radio voice became frantic. "Turn around, turn around, turn around, turn around, turn around." In panic, Jake lunged across me and slammed his hand against the lock button, though I don't think a lock would have stopped whatever was outside. Then he tried the ignition again, turning the key with desperate force. Miraculously, the engine roared to life. Jake didn't hesitate. He slammed the car into drive and floored it. We fishtailed on the broken pavement before gaining traction and speeding forward into the fog. I twisted in my seat to look behind us, but could see nothing except the swirling white mist we left in our wake. We drove like that for what felt like hours, the fog never thinning, the radio occasionally crackling with unintelligible whispers. The clock on the dashboard seemed stuck at 12:33 a.m., the numbers unmoving no matter how long we drove. Finally, Jake spotted what looked like an exit ramp. Without hesitating, he swerved onto it, desperate to get off that cursed highway. The fog began to thin as we descended the ramp, and we could make out lights in the distance. A small town, maybe. "Oh, thank God," I breathed, feeling hope for the first time since midnight. We followed the road toward the lights, the fog continuing to dissipate until we could see clearly again. There were buildings up ahead, streetlights illuminating a main street. As we got closer, though, my hope turned to confusion, then to horror. In the distance stood a familiar flickering neon sign. "Last stop gas." "No," Jake whispered. "That's impossible." We drove for hours in the opposite direction, but there it was, the same gas station we'd left behind. The clock on the dashboard suddenly changed, jumping from 12:33 to 11:58 p.m. As we pulled up to the gas station in stunned silence, the radio crackled one final time, the voice now clear as day. "You should have turned around." We never made it to Colorado. We never made it anywhere. To this day, I don't know what happened that night or what we encountered on that road. All I know is that I never want to drive at night again, and I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, somehow, we're still driving on that endless highway, trapped in a loop we can never escape. Story 22. I've been driving trucks for 27 years, crossed every state you can name, driven through blizzards, sandstorms, you name it. But what happened last December on that empty stretch of highway in New Mexico? I still can't explain it. I don't talk about it much. Who would believe me anyway? But I need to get this off my chest. It was December 18th, about 11:30 at night. I was hauling electronics from Sacramento to Dallas behind schedule because of loading delays at the warehouse. The dispatcher was breathing down my neck about delivery times, so I decided to push through instead of stopping at the motel I'd planned on. The night was clear, stars everywhere like you only see in the desert. Temperature had dropped to around 30 degrees, cold for that part of New Mexico. I had the heat blasting and was sipping my third coffee, listening to some old Merle Haggard on the radio to keep myself alert. That stretch of highway is nothing but desert and scrub brush. No streetlights, no gas stations, just miles of empty road. The kind of lonely that makes you check your mirrors every few minutes just to remember civilization exists. I'd just passed a mile marker when I first spotted the taillights ahead. They were dim, almost flickering like old-style bulbs. At first I thought nothing of it, just another truck or maybe a broken-down car. But as I got closer, I realized the vehicle was stopped dead center of my lane. "What the hell?" I muttered, slowing down. My headlights illuminated the back of an old semi, and I mean old. Not vintage restored old, but genuinely decades out of service old. It had those rounded edges they don't make anymore, rusted rear doors and tires that looked cracked with age. I slowed to about 20 miles per hour, hanging back. The truck wasn't just parked, it was completely motionless, no hazards flashing, nothing. I flashed my brights a couple times, thinking maybe the driver had fallen asleep. No response. As I carefully pulled alongside, my lights swept across faded lettering on the truck's door, Caldwell and Sons Freight. The paint was chipped and weathered, like it had been baking in the sun for 30 years. The whole rig was covered in a layer of dust and grime so thick you could write your name in it. I could see the driver slumped forward over the steering wheel. My first thought was heart attack or stroke. I laid on my horn, 3 long blasts. The figure didn't move. I pulled ahead and stopped, setting my brakes and grabbing my flashlight from the glove box. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't just leave someone who might need medical help. The night air hit me like a slap when I stepped out, desert cold, the kind that goes straight through your clothes. My breath came out in thick clouds as I walked back toward the other truck. The silence was complete except for the tick-tick-tick of my cooling engine and the crunch of my boots on the asphalt. As I got closer, details started jumping out at me. The truck's model, I realized it was a Kenworth from maybe the 60s. The license plate was so rusted I couldn't make out the numbers. And there was something else, something I only noticed because I've been driving in cold weather for decades. There was no exhaust vapor coming from the stack. If the engine was running, I should have seen clouds of condensation in the freezing air. I shined my light through the passenger window as I approached. The cab was immaculate inside. Old-fashioned gauges, a vintage radio, even an ashtray full of cigarette butts. But what struck me was that the windows weren't fogged up. In that cold, if someone had been breathing inside, those windows should have been clouded. I walked around to the driver's side, my unease growing with each step. The man was still there, motionless, hands gripping the wheel. He was wearing what looked like a flannel shirt and one of those old-style trucking caps nobody's worn since the 70s. His hands were pale, almost gray, and looked stiff on the wheel. I tapped on the window. Nothing. I tried the door handle. It opened with a creak that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. "Hey buddy, you okay?" My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. The smell hit me immediately. Musty, like old clothes left in a basement. Not the decay I feared, but something else I couldn't place. Something wrong. I reached in and touched his shoulder. The jacket felt stiff and cold, not just cool, but ice cold, like it had been in a freezer. But somehow, impossibly, I could see the faintest movement of breathing. That's when he turned to me, so slowly it was almost imperceptible at first. His face, God, I'll never forget that face. It was like a skull with skin stretched too tight across it. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, lips pulled back in what looked like a permanent grimace. His skin had a waxy, grayish quality that no living person should have. His eyes opened, cloudy and yellowed like old photographs, and fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "Help me." The whisper was barely audible, a dry rustling like dead leaves blowing across pavement. His breath didn't fog in the cold air. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. Before I could respond, he slumped forward again, hands still fixed on the wheel. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I fumbled for my phone to call 911, backing away toward my truck. That's when I saw headlights in my side mirror, coming up fast, too fast. The approaching vehicle swerved at the last second, missing my truck by inches. It was another semi, horn blaring as it passed, but it never slowed. I caught a glimpse of the driver, just a normal guy, probably pissed at finding two trucks blocking the highway. I turned back toward the old Kenworth, ready to explain to the driver why I was parked in the road, but the truck was gone. The road ahead was empty, no taillights disappearing into the distance, no sound of an engine, nothing, just empty desert highway stretching into darkness. I stood there for what felt like minutes, my flashlight beams sweeping the empty road, the surrounding desert. Nothing. No tire tracks leading off the highway, no sign the truck had ever been there. I practically dove back into my cab, locked the doors, and started moving. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I kept checking my mirrors, convinced I'd see those dim taillights appear behind me. The highway seemed to stretch endlessly. I pushed my speedometer to 85, 90, not caring about tickets or safety. I just needed to get away. The roads were getting slick, a light frost forming as the temperature dropped further, but I couldn't slow down. I drove non-stop until I hit the next truck stop in Tucumcari, nearly 2 hours later. I parked under the brightest lights I could find and sat there shaking, unable to step out of my truck for nearly an hour. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I called a buddy who'd been driving these routes for longer than me. I didn't tell him everything, just asked if he'd ever heard of Caldwell and Sons Freight. There was a long pause before he answered. "Where'd you hear that name?" I made up something about seeing an old photograph. He told me Caldwell was a small operation back in the 60s and 70s. Went out of business after one of their drivers disappeared on a route through New Mexico. The truck and driver were never found. I've looked up everything I can find about Caldwell and Sons since then. There's not much, just a few mentions in old industry magazines. They were based out of Amarillo, ran routes to California, went bankrupt in 1973 after the oil crisis hit, and they lost their main driver. I've driven that stretch of highway 3 times since then. I always pass it during daylight now, and I never stop, no matter what. Sometimes I think I see something in my rearview mirror, dim tail lights that seem to be keeping pace with me no matter how fast I drive. But when I look directly, there's nothing there. The worst part is the dreams. I keep seeing that face, skin stretched over bone, those clouded eyes, hearing that whispered, "Help me." I wake up drenched in sweat, feeling like someone's sitting on my chest. I don't know what I saw that night. A ghost, some kind of hallucination from too much caffeine and too little sleep, or something else, something that was never human to begin with. All I know is that sometimes, when I'm driving late at night and see taillights ahead, I feel this crawling dread. Is it just another truck, or is it him again, waiting for someone else to stop, to reach out and touch that cold shoulder? I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed longer, if I'd tried to help him again. Part of me feels guilty for running, but a deeper part knows I made the right choice. I still drive that route sometimes. It's unavoidable in my line of work, but I never stop on that stretch of highway anymore, and I never ever pull over for a truck with dim tail lights.